Hey Deely-Boppers, what's up? I'm only like 7 minutes late to the first episode of my new podcast, the Melodrama Menagerie. So this is a live podcast that I decided to start because one of my Deely-Boppers, which is what I call my fans, for those of you who weren't aware and who have been wondering for like, I don't know, like 2 years at this point, what that means. That's what I like to call my fans because I love them and I think of them as like my world. And so when one of them is like, hey, you should do a podcast, because I need something for my ears to do while my hands are busy at work, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm a little bit obligated to do that. So this is the first episode and I decided to call it I Miss My Desk. Because right now I feel like I look like I'm in one of those like reality TV breakaway moments. I feel like my surroundings are incredibly boring, and I feel like it's more than my desk that I miss. I mean, I used to have these bookcases. That's why my roommate's running up the stairs, by the way. But I used to have bookcases with like books and videos on them, and like there's all sorts of other like nifty scenery behind me at a point, right? And like now it's me, a chair, a wall, a camera, and a microphone. And I really just wish I had a desk in front of me. And I don't feel like I've ever done this sort of setup, right? Where I just have like a freaking desk, like John Oliver or something, okay? But like Tumblr feminist social justice warrior queen version of John Oliver, right? And I would just love to have a desk in front of me right now. I would love to have a desk in front of me. And like, I don't know, maybe I'd have to decide what I would want to put behind me. I feel like one day I'm gonna end up putting like a big fish tank behind me with like cool novelty lighting and stuff. And one day this harsh white lighting that makes me look really overexposed will be like cool red, blue, and green lighting. But like at the moment, this is what the Melodrama Menagerie looks like. So anyway, welcome to my life. It's a very, very, very dramatic kind of life, I feel. I feel like, you know what, though? I feel like most women could say that about our lives, couldn't we? Like, let's be honest with ourselves here. I really felt like we could. So, I've actually, like, I'm one of those women who was at one point in my life diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which one of the features of it is, like, being melodramatic, and I think sometimes people say hysterical, but like I don't like the word hysteria because I feel like it's very misogynist. But basically, you know, the way I would describe that feeling is, you know, being one of those women who feels like you sort of like, it's like they say in the Vagina Monologues, which I love that play, and I was actually in it a couple of years ago in Pensacola, but anyway, women who go too far and feel too much. I actually once knew a psychologist who'd graduated and was working, who actually felt like borderline personality disorder was overdiagnosed and was just like sort of a stigmatization of femininity and of like sort of just like being a woman who's like had certain life experiences or like, you know, just has a lot of strong feelings. And like that's more like their field. Like I'm not an expert in that. I have like, you know, a decent understanding of some basic psychology as, you know, someone who's been in and out with like therapists and someone who has also actually majored in education at a point in time, which actually required doing all these sort of psychology courses where you are expected to like get a really quick grasp of a lot of things very quickly. But I feel like the more interesting classes when I was in college were the classes on sociology. And one of them there was a project I had to do at a point in time. And this was when I was going to, it was called Pensacola Junior College back then, but now it's Pensacola State College. And I was doing this project on the differences in the way people of different genders communicate. And back then, of course, it wasn't really as sort of non-binary as I just made that. It was much more binarily focused just on like men and women. And there have been studies on communication and the way that gender affects communication, so that's valid. And it was really cool. It was really fun because I want to say that I was like trying to remember exactly how old I was at this point in time when I was actually still an education major, but I feel like it was about when I was like 19 and 20. And I was just sort of starting to actually find myself and explore my identity as the possibility of something that like I could actually like live in and exist in, as opposed to like feeling like I was stuck inside of this existence that was not mine and didn't make sense. But so I was spending a lot of time going to the local queer club, which was Emerald City. I believe it closed over like an ownership dispute, which is like, that's really tragic because safe spaces for queer people are super duper important. My life experiences have proven that, as I'm sure have many other LGBT people who live in areas where queer safe spaces are not accessible. But so anyway, I was not living in like a super duper what I thought of as liberal area, obviously, because like Pensacola, Florida is just like, if the Bible Belt had a buckle, Pensacola would be it. Or at least like Pacewood, like this place outside of Pensacola where I grew up. And so anyway, it was like, you know, people were really homophobic and transphobic and racist and stuff like that where I grew up. And it was just like, you know, it was really sad, it was really depressing, and it made the whole area not the sort of environment where like you want to come out when you're in high school, which I was only out to like, it's weird because I feel like I was basically out to like 2 people when I was in high school, but I feel like I was more out to one of them than I was to the other, to be entirely honest. But I feel like it's like they both knew. I'm sure a lot of my friends did, more than just those 2, which is basically the point. And when I got into college, I was a lot less timid about starting to explore my gender. And a lot of people just sort of saw me as like that kid that was like the weird quiet goth kid they went to school with who wore like eyeliner and blue mascara and was obsessed with Ozzy. And there was like all of this really just like so many deeper layers to me that they all just sort of got hidden and shoved away. I was kind of one of the quiet kids. It was like, I was that introvert extrovert that was like, the only time I could be extroverted was if it was about like some niche interest, because I'm a huge nerd. And so I would geek out about my favorite bands, and Ozzy was the one I think most people would think of because I got like glasses that were tinted blue. Just because I love the blue glasses. But anyway, I loved like so much music. I don't know where I got like sidetracked on the music, but that's a valid sidetrack though. It was like I think people mostly just thought of me of listening to like, you know, the goth rock and stuff like that, and my favorite bands were the goth rock. It was stuff like Evanescence and stuff like Nightwish and stuff like Within Temptation, a lot of female fronted metal. Before I started listening to metal and rock though, and punk, which I feel like it's just such a shame that there's not more female fronted music in like rock on the radio right now than there is. I feel like there's a huge disparity there in just like the prevalence of like all male metal and like metal by women, or like at least, you know, with women involved, which is like some of the best metal. But anyway, before that, like before my friends turned me on to metal, which was like towards the end of middle school, I was like a country listener and a pop listener, and I feel like my favorite music was Britney Spears and Michelle Branch. And Pam Tillis, and like a little bit of Phil Collins, which is like completely, I guess it's not completely off genre since that's still pop. It's just like dude pop, which is like, I feel like dudes get classed as pop more often than they used to. I feel like that's starting to in sort of like the boy band era, but you know, I still feel like pop is sort of one of those places where it's like women's music just sort of gets shoved into because it's like not taken as seriously by music hipsters and stuff like that. But that's you know, that's a tangent for like a whole other video about how like, you know, how hipsters are sort of misogynist about women in music when they're dissing on pop icons. But anyway, that was my favorite music. Britney Spears and Michelle Branch and like Pam Tillis and just like all these singers that like I always wanted to be. Music was so important to me. I was sort of raised in it. I learned how to play guitar when I was like 13, I think. And bass shortly thereafterwards. I've been singing my whole life. I was in all-county chorus when I was in elementary school. The chorus teacher always would have to get on to me for singing the soprano parts, and like I did not want to sing the alto parts, but anyway, I was really good, is my point. And so music was something I always wanted to do, but at the same time, I always had to deal with the struggle of like not being able to really be me. And I was always depressed when I would think about it, because I would think about like how much I wanted to be like Tarja Turunen from Nightwish, or I wanted to be like Amy Lee from Evanescence, and like I had all this sort of poetry inside of me and art inside of me. Most people knew me for like drawing and stuff like that, and I switched to an art major eventually. But there was so much more to me than that that always wanted to speak. I guess it came out at like the D&D table mainly, which is sort of like a desk. So, you know, back to the desk. I just feel like having a desk here would be like such a better way to talk about these things. I feel like it would be easier to like, say for example, grab my makeup than from grabbing it from like a bag on the floor beside my chair. But you know, it is what it is. I will get a desk, and I will get a fish tank, and I will get all sorts of neon novelty lighting, and it will be glorious and amazing. So, but anyway, back to the subject of this college course I was going through, and specifically this project I had to do, which was basically teaching a whole lesson on my own, on gendered communications and how being aware of the social conventions that are sort of anticipated and expected within social groups of certain genders, like how understanding those things can help ease communication difficulties that can occur between genders when like people are just misinterpreting each other because like genders sort of speak differently a lot of the times. And I feel like it's like broadly categorized, but gender is a social construct, so it's expected to be more of a spectrum than a binary. But still, at the same time, it's like people who identify very strongly as masculine or feminine typically seem in studies to have certain ways of gendered communication. And they get like so vastly blown out of proportion when it comes to like just everyday life, to be honest with you. But I feel like it's easier when, like, say, you're a woman dealing with a group of women and talking to them. I feel like I'm better understood most of the time, as long as it's, like, you know, women I'm close with, especially other transgender women. But, like, other cis women that I'm really close with too. I feel better understood, and like it's easier to talk about things, and like it's more fun and less frustrating and like wanting to rip my hair out. And then talking to men most of the times is the opposite. Thankfully, my male friends are feminists. I don't keep male friends who are not feminists. So it's a little bit easier, but at the same time, it's not just matters of like women's rights and things like that, obviously. Just little things about the subtleties, I feel like a lot of times was one of the topics that was really touched on, were that there are a lot of subtleties a lot of times in the way that women communicate, whereas a lot of times it seems that the studies found that men were a little bit more blunt at times, and like your mileage may vary, okay? But these were broadly sort of gender differences, things like how, say for example, and a lot of these, it's funny because like so many of these come from like, there's some of them that just, they seem so natural and ingrained. And then there's others of them that just like seem to almost stem from just like dealing with toxic masculinity. But I guess that's I guess that's a sort of natural way to react as a woman when you're having to deal with men. But there are things like how I may be a little bit more indirect about something, which I feel like a lot of women find ourselves sort of falling into that, and I feel like we should be a little bit more direct at times. But that's probably one of those things that like is sort of an impact of just the way that we interact in society, and the way that institutionalized misogyny and toxic masculinity like frame the whole world is sort of a little bit like, I feel like it makes you timid to approach it a little bit. It doesn't feel like a super safe place, But anyway, there are other things like how, say for example, when I'm listening, I tend to use a lot of sort of little noises of like acknowledgement, I guess is the thing, to let people know that I'm listening. And it keeps me actively listening too. And then vocalized pauses are something that I work on, because there's something that can be very easily overcome, but I definitely find myself susceptible to them. I always have to sort of throw myself back to my speech class days in high school. Or was it, I think it was high school? Yeah, it was definitely high school, not middle school. And sort of like remember how not to do those things. I remember the class would always shout back the vocalized pauses. And like is my favorite one, because I don't feel like it's always a vocalized pause, like that, for example. Sometimes you're using it to make a metaphor or a simile. Sometimes, phrasing a question, sort of like that. And I feel almost like vocalized pauses become so natural when you feel as though you just have to sort of keep your sentence moving in order for people to keep listening. And that is the way that I feel like most women feel in social situations, where we feel like we have something important that we need to say, because men just cut us off so much. But I feel like if I had a desk, I could feel a little bit more official, and maybe it would be easier to like not feel like I had to make those vocalized pauses. The desk is like, it's sort of a thing of power, isn't it? Like in front of you, you have that desk there, and it's all official. And that's the weird thing, is that like, oh my gosh, that's another thing. We have to go so far explaining our qualifications and shit like that all the time in order to get people to listen to us, whereas like men are just sort of used to being like taken as being right in anything because they always assume they're right. And like, I am so sorry, but sometimes the male ego is so fragile, and I feel like we've all dealt with this, right? So, but when we're amongst other women, I feel like we're used to being very open with each other. I feel like we're very empathetic. I feel like that's a quality that, like, that like most women possess is a greater degree of empathy, and that was one of the things that was focused on in communicative styles, is that, you know, say if you're telling me a story about how difficult your life is, right? And when you get to a point where there's like a break in it, I throw in something about my own experiences. A lot of times in communications among groups of men, it's seen as one-upsmanship to throw in your own experiences. Whereas when women are communicating, we're throwing in our experiences to be like, I feel for you. Like, honey, that is horrible. All that you've had to deal with. And I've been through those places and times in my life where I have felt like I wasn't allowed to have emotions. Just as an example, that's like how I would relate to someone, for example, who, you know, was wanting to relate to like someone who understood what it feels like, the kind of feelings that someone who has been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder feels like. And I don't feel like it's unique to that. I feel like so many women could say that like we've spent our lives being told how much we are and aren't allowed to feel. And I'm on my period right now, which I mean that literally. I laugh at it because when I say that, I'm transgender, and so like I don't bleed or anything, but because I've been on hormone replacement therapy for almost 3 years at this point. I'm also like taking progesterone, which was added at a later point for me, and I take it like 12 days out of every month, and then 17 days off, which is what is recommended. So sort of any of like all the same hormonal impacts are there. I feel like people take for granted so much how just like, wow, exactly how much of an influence hormones have on the human brain, right? Excuse me, I am sick as a fucking dog, alright? But I decided to do this podcast anyway because I was bored. And I was like, well, my fans want to hear more from me, and I'm bored, so may as well work, right? But anyway, I literally just lost track of what I was thinking about. Oh, hormones play like such a super huge role in the function of the human brain. And I feel like some of the obvious like throw out examples are like, you know, if a dude's shooting up on like excessive amounts of testosterone, trying to like, you know, roid up or something like that, obviously, we know that's like associated. Excuse me, I can't speak today. It's associated. I just couldn't for a moment. It's associated with increased spikes in aggressiveness and violent behavior, and like not trying to necessarily say, because I feel like toxic masculinity is such a construct. Like, I don't feel like violence is a tendency that's built into men. Obviously, like, you know, too much testosterone, too much of anything throws your system out of balance, you know. I'm sure there's too much of, like, any different type of hormone. This is actually one of the concerns when you're a transgender woman on hormone replacement therapy, is making sure that your body and your brain agree with your hormones, and that, for example, you know, estrogen and a lack of testosterone is not making you depressed. Which I feel like it would for someone whose like, you know, mental physiology was not necessarily meant for an environment like that. But I feel like, you know, if it jives well, it jives well. And that's the basic theory of hormone replacement therapy, is like, if it jives well and the levels are looking healthy, then it works. And I feel like it definitely does for me, but I definitely feel those moments of like, I feel like my period comes with like this feeling of just like feminine empowerment, cravings for chocolate. Like, I'm not gonna lie, huge cravings for chocolate, huge cravings for protein, like peanut butter especially. Huge cravings for junk food though, too, just cravings. but like the main ones are like chocolate, proteiny fatty shit like peanut butter, and junk food. Like in that order. And I feel like I get very sort of emotional about things, but I feel empowered with my emotions as opposed to like I don't shame myself for them anymore like I used to. Because I feel like shaming myself for my emotions led me to like hurting myself a lot. Which I don't like. I don't make any. That's what I'm looking for. I feel like another thing is that like women tend to talk with our hands a bit more than men do. Like both genders are. Excuse me, that's horrible. There's so many more than two. All genders like talk with our hands, but as you like make that slide from femininity towards masculinity, it seems like it decreases, and like when you're going the other way, it seems like it increases. And this is all based on studies, you know. My personal experiences have seemed to confirm this, and I definitely feel like I relate to them. And most people who've known me my whole life have, which is why when I first came out in high school, and it was like to my one friend who literally like they were trying to tell me I was trans, and like my response to it was like one of, yeah, this is right, but at the same time, are you fucking crazy? Like, I'm gonna get the shit beaten out of me at school, right? And I've been through violence for being trans. Like, I don't feel like that's an unusual thing for a trans person to say. I feel like we can all say that. Like, you go to a meeting of trans people and want to talk about violence for being trans, but, like, I've been through the ringer with it, and I don't like talking about individual experiences necessarily, unless, like, I have to in order to frame them, but, it's because they're traumatizing, and I feel like a lot of that links back in because like I said, I was once diagnosed with borderline personality disorder that was actually changed to post-traumatic stress disorder at a point in time because I had just been through violence and abuse, and actually at a point in time had my entire life just sort of like stripped away, and living through those kinds of experiences, like, you know, that nightmare worst case scenario that like LGBT people fear when they come out. Thinking that you're safe. Thinking, oh, my parents are liberal. Thinking, oh, it doesn't matter if, you know, they're Catholic. Thinking, oh, they were okay with, like, my gay friends and stuff like that. Remembering back to, like, times when, like, you know, it was my father who first explained to me that sex and gender are two different things. I feel like when I was maybe 10 years, I feel like it was about the time when there were, I can't remember exactly, it's so, like, nostalgically faded. I just vaguely remember, like, the room from the conversation, and that it was around the same time that, like, pens with erasers were a really popular thing. I love them so much because, like, as an artistic chick, I could just, like, draw like stuff in pen which looked cooler and then like erase it. And I didn't realize at the point in time that you could like take a pencil and draw something and then ink it, you know, like cartoonists and comic book artists do. But I figured that out later. And like I thought I was safe, and I wasn't. And like, you know, going through those situations, it just like it really sort of it's traumatic. It definitely induced that, and I've been having to figure out all sorts of different ways to cope with that ever since. And then those weren't even the worst of the experiences. The worst was later on, and that I really don't like talking about, but I do, yeah, when like I'm typing online. I feel like typing is easy, talking is hard. But at the same time, I feel like talking is easy and typing is hard. It's weird. It's definitely weird. Because it's like, you know, like when you're typing about something, you're behind a keyboard. It's easier to burst into tears behind a keyboard, right? Definitely, I feel that way. And I feel like, women, we have this expectation that we're sort of allowed to be more vulnerable, but I'm not sure if society really allows for it for a lot of trans girls. But like that's okay, because I've been sort of like learning a little bit more how to open up and be vulnerable. But it's like I've been kidnapped, I've been raped, I've been beaten, I've been strangled, just like all sorts of different things, right? And it's like, this is just who I am. And so it is very like trauma inducing, but I feel like every woman's experiences are trauma inducing to a point. And I feel like, I'm gonna say, like, I don't even want to say, like, especially women who, like, date men, because I feel like when you're a lesbian, you face violence for being a lesbian. Like, you're constantly fetishized, for one. Your sexuality is attacked. It's like somehow, it's like there's this entitlement that men seem to have, where it's like, oh, they're just entitled to you. Like, I mean, men have felt plenty entitled to my body. I've had men who have groped my genitals at bars. I've had men who have groped my breasts at bars. And I feel like there's this thing where it's like when you're a lesbian, like, they feel entitled to you, and the fact that we have no interest in return towards men is like, I guess it's like they feel like they're entitled to every woman. So the fact that we're like not available on the menu, it's like somehow personally wronging them or something like that. And it's a load of bullshit. So it's actually what I wanted to talk about a bit today, is like fragile masculinity. Like, how, it's just so like, I feel like we raise men in this like super toxic society that like it just instills this idea of women as objects and men as actors. And that's not okay. Like, women are actors too. Actually, the term actor is gender neutral, but we're in this society where men are looked at as people, women are looked at as objects or property, and it's not cool. And it's like it's been changing for the better, but we still have so far to go. And when I look at it, it's so depressing. And like, you live through it, it's so depressing, right? And like, I feel like there's a point of like in your life where you feel like all women, like, we get used to like justifying it to ourselves, or just like dealing with it, or finding ways to cope or work around it, or be like, oh, this is just the way it is, and like, I'm just gonna deal with it. And I'm glad that so many more women are getting fed up, because it was like, there was a time when it was not very popular to be a feminist. Like, even among other women, I still feel sometimes going some places, I'm still like, there's every now and then I want to look at someone and be like, wait, are you like not a feminist? Like, what's up? But like, it's getting better, and that's cool, because I feel like we're really close to like actually breaking through. But so a lot of people, they called last year. They called last year, what was it? The year of buff women. And that made me so happy, because I've always been like a really big proponent of body positivity for women who are more muscular. I feel like that's super necessary for transgender women, obviously, but for cisgender women too, who are more muscular. I feel like there's this whole fragile masculine concept that like, it's just instilled and taught into men. It's so disgusting, and it needs to stop, where we teach men this idea that like, that men are inherently superior and women are inherently inferior. Men are inherently dominant, women are inherently submissive. And I feel like we instill this, right? And so a man sees a woman who is more muscular, maybe even more muscular than him, right? And, like, first of all, women who are muscular are, like, super attractive and sexy as fuck, and, like, every lesbian on the planet will agree with me, which is why I feel like this was, like, a huge thing that was pushed on Tumblr, but, like, oh my gosh, like, beautiful, okay? Goals, even more than that. Like, I look online and I see, like, a picture of, like, a muscular fit woman, and I am like, why can't I be in the gym right now? Like, I was bemoaning this the other day, even though I'm sick as a dog. Like, my roommate brought home something, I'm pretty sure it's the plague, but, like, I've been thinking so much lately, I've been so depressed, right? I want to cry right now, but I'm trying to just, like, sort of power through here. I've been so depressed lately. And when I say lately, I mean for, like, oh my gosh, like, ever since I was raped, which was most recently, like, a little over a year ago. And I've been trying to get back to me, because I've always been this really super bold, outspoken woman. I believe so firmly in the idea that no woman makes history by being well behaved. And I'd say I'm very ambitious too. I am so ambitious. And I feel like at this point in time, we need more ambitious voices. We need more ambitious women just, like, breaking the mold and, like, not being afraid to look at a culture of misogyny and of toxic masculinity and be, like, sort of like, no, bad boy, you know? I feel like I just came to understand just a little bit better why one of my exes told me that they wanted me to become, like, a career dominatrix one day. But I'd rather be a musician. So moving right along. I feel like also a musician and a YouTube personality, but I mean, like I'm already both of those things anyway. And you know, I can be a dominatrix privately as opposed to, like, for a career, if I ever have partners that are, like, into that. I feel like talking as like a liberated woman about even if you're still in your shackles, because society still has them there, but, like, as a woman who's trying to be liberated, right? Especially with regards to your sexuality. I feel like that's such a powerful thing to do, and I wonder if we've started to forget that. Until I remember that, like, the Women's March has got, like, the pussy hats and everything, and no one's shy about talking about their vagoos, right? Which is wonderful. But at the same time, it's like, well, not all women have those, and womanhood isn't defined by that. Like, not by the social conventions of womanhood at all. And as far as, like, you know, the science of sex and gender are concerned, the evidence is there to back up that biologically there is absolutely a reason that transgender women relate more to cisgender women than they do to cisgender men, and why transgender men relate more to cisgender men than they do to cisgender women. And I feel like everyone is a bit non-binary, because the gender binary is a lie. You know, gender is a spectrum, and we know that. And any expert on the topic will very quickly tell you that. But, like, you know, Joe Blow, average schmo walking around, wants to, like, blow his own horn and just be the armchair expert on the topic and contradict everyone with, like, their PhDs and everything, right? And not to mention just the lived fucking experiences of all of the very, like, incredibly valid trans people, right? Like, it's so typical for him to just be like, there, you know, there's two despite making fun of a dude voice, there's two genders. I didn't start that right. I'm so sorry. I so totally didn't start that the way that a guy would start it. Let me do that right. Well, actually, there's two genders, penis and vagina. There's not even two types of genitals that people are born with. Like, there's like, I was looking at a diagram the other day that had like 6 or 7 different intersex variations. It's in one of my videos. And chromosomally, there's I think it's listed as like 6 biological karyotypical sexes. Excuse me. Karyotypical is, for chromosomes. And it's like, regardless, gender is independent, because gender is not your chromosomes, it's not your body parts as far as like how they're arranged, where your genitals are. It is how we relate with other people in terms of like how like or dislike we are in our own opinions with them. And it's one of many things like that, which are all social constructs, although that's not what a social construct necessarily is. A social construct is just like, it's an idea that people have built and built upon, and usually they vary from culture to culture and society to society. Gender is no different. Gender has been expressed and lived and thought of differently by so many cultures, but one of the common themes in most of them is that it generally hasn't really actually been a binary. And you can look at this historically, you can take up the study of it if you'd like to, but they do get very sort of compressed right now and aligned to bodies, and I feel like it's not truth for so many people, like at least twice as many as there are natural redheads, okay? Which that's statistically very significant. And for a lot of people, even who identify themselves as cis, it doesn't necessarily fit the mold either. And then of course, you have to stop and remember that, there's people who are not trans or cis who are paracis, who happen to be intersex. I feel like it was funny because I don't like necessarily laughing at other people's misery, but this person is aware of this, so they're not necessarily miserable right now. But I actually had a friend who was intersex who was like so transphobic and so like all about being cis when it came to like confronting and arguing with trans people, just seemingly because they were really transphobic. And they, I don't know whether or not they were aware that they were intersex or not, as far as how that all works, because like, so they had like clitoromegaly, right? And like, that's a form of being intersex, and like they would talk about this, right? And like they knew that their body was different. And so it's like, on the one level, it's like, I guess maybe they didn't know that being intersex was a thing, was what it was. So, but anyway, they wanted to be cis, right? Well, they were actually paracis, which is like, that's the term for people who are intersex, who identify with the sex they were assigned to at birth, because of the fact that, regardless of whether or not a mutilation has occurred, it's like their actual sex is different from the sex that they were assigned. And so the way that you look at it, it's like if you have somebody who is intersex, it's not necessarily possible to identify with what cis is meant to mean, as it's very strictly defined, which is someone who is assigned to a certain sex which aligns with a gender which is attached to that sex by like the framework of the Western gender binary, which is transphobic and which is it's scientifically inaccurate as well. So in order to be cis, it's like, you don't just identify with the gender that you were assigned at birth. It's like the gender that you were assigned at birth has to be the gender that was like put with what you were sort of like decided to be by the doctor. Because when you're intersex, the doctor makes a decision and like may or may not alter you, and adult people who are intersex actually go through like their entire lives not knowing they're intersex, even like with alterations in some cases because of how it's done, and in a lot of cases because sex education is just very poor on these subjects. And that's like its whole topic that like intersex people have to deal with, and that's like horrible because it is. It's another one of those things that like you're literally just a part of human biological diversity and you get erased. And excuse me. So anyway, they look between your legs and make a decision based on a measurement of the external genitalia, what you're supposed to be like or not. And a lot of times with clitoromegaly, that's one of those places where, like, in the past, there have actually been intersex people with clitoromegaly who have been, like, given hormone treatments by doctors as babies, like, without wanting or consenting to it, which is totally different from, like, a trans adult or even a trans child who is like, this is who I am. Please don't let me turn into this other thing, which is how I felt growing up, but I didn't know that there was an option. I just thought that it was like I was just stuck in this horrible, like, roller coaster world where I felt like a girl, and everyone saw me as a girl. But because of my body, I was not allowed to be one, which was framed to me, like, very early by my parents, and, like, I had so few references for, like, what transness even was, and then once I did, it just, like, it wasn't safe for me for so long, and I tried to suppress it, don't we all? Like, I was raised Catholic, I was raised to believe that, like, being trans was like a sin or against God or whatever, and it's a load of bullshit. And my father seemed to feel the same way, but he seemed a little bit more educated on genders. I don't feel like my mother felt that way, but my mother can go fuck herself as far as she's concerned with, like, that opinion. And so back to sort of why this was, like, I felt like it was funny almost because, like, this person was like, they didn't realize that it was like, okay, they had clitoromegaly, but they didn't realize that they were intersex and therefore paracis. And I think about this, and I think about all these labels, and I think about that little, like, smirk of, like, okay, you're frustrated with this person, right? And you're just like, for a moment, you're just like, oh, haha, and they don't even know that it's, like, this thing that would bother them probably if they knew it, and, like, you sit there and you think to yourself that that's actually kind of sad. Like, think about that. That's sad. That's really, really sad. Right? Super duper duper sad. And stop and think about the life experiences of, like, what it's like to be an intersex person with clitoromegaly. Like, that's not something that dudes are taught about in sex ed. So if you're assigned female and, like, you live your life as a woman and you feel like you're a woman, then, and that's valid, and you've got this label of, like, paracis because, like, it has to be there, right? In a system where you have to account for trans and cis and paracis, it's like, it's got to be there, right? Well, it's funny because the only reason it has to be there is because of the Western gender binary. Like, without it, there's no label there. Without it, there's really no, like, I feel trans or cis necessarily, because, like, without the Western gender binary, everyone's just non-binary and able to find their places amongst everything. Although, like, obviously, like, you look at me, I would just be a woman. Like, that's how my gender would just be thought of. Like, my gender would not be looked at as a transgender woman, I would just be looked at as a woman. But at the same time, I have dysphoria, right? Over my body. And science says, well, even though gender and sex are two different things, those things are linked. And to people who study sex and gender, whether it's sociologically or physiologically or psychologically or biologically, none of those things are surprising. They all correlate with each other. It's like there's not necessarily this thing that where, okay, like, you don't have to have dysphoria to be trans. You don't feel like something is wrong with your body. You don't have to experience distress over a perceived difference between the gender you were assigned with and the gender that you feel like you're with. And boy, the fuck does that get complicated at this point, right? Because you look at, like, people who are cis who are gender non-conforming, or people who are paracis and gender non-conforming, which, like, the whole point of what I was going to try to say there is that it's like, I feel horrible. Like, when I have those little things where I think to myself, it's like, oh, if only this person knew that they don't fit into this privileged category quite the way they thought they did. Even though, like, say that they sort of pass like they do, okay? But they don't. Like, stop and think about that in your private life. Stop and think about what the situation would be like. People thinking that your genitals are weird all the time, okay? Oh my gosh. And it's like, at least I feel like with it's like people know what to expect-ish. Except they're always asking, like, what do you have? What do you have? What do you have? Right? That's so frustrating. I wonder all the time if cis people think about what it would be like if people actually, like, asked about that, like, to them. It's so disgusting. Um, but anyway, it's also technically sexual harassment. Anyway, excuse me, I got a little bit off this train of toxic masculinity. Um, but anyway, it was frustrating. I wanted to talk about buff ladies. That's right. I got off the topic of buff ladies. How did I do that so easily when, like, this is goals for me, right? Totally. And that's a complex place to be as a transgender woman, like, isn't it? Because you have this whole body negative culture, right? Based on toxic masculinity and fragile egos, where we have this thing built up that, like, if you're a man, you gotta be superior, and, like, to every woman in every way, otherwise you're emasculated, is like what it's called. And it's like, what even is that? It's like losing the status of masculinity. It's literally what it means. And it's like that right there, it breaks it down so simply that our society affords masculinity a status which can be removed by not being superior to, like, every woman on the planet in some way, right? So, like, okay, we have this thing built up where, like, literally we have these ideas spread that if you're a woman who is muscular, whether it's because you're naturally built that way, whether it's because you spend hours of dedication in the gym and, like, eating, like, a really super whatever diet to, like, make your body look that way because you enjoy it or whatever. And, like, this is also super valid, and none of it's masculine, but we have this construct where, because it's one of those things that, like, men fear a strong woman, especially, like, a physically strong woman. I feel like men fear so much. And I feel like it's very, like, telling sort of to, like, the guilt of violence against women, right? That it's like why do you, it's like, what do you have to be afraid of? Like, but at the same time, it's like, you know, a woman is not immune from being abusive, you know. Any lesbian will tell you that. We've all been with abusive girlfriends at some point, haven't we? And I've been with emotionally abusive girlfriends. I've been with physically abusive girlfriends. It's, you look at girl world, it's like, look at the plastics, look at, you know, and I'm using very high school terms right here, but, like, I like to think of the world a little bit, like, in relation to Mean Girls, because unfortunately it is sometimes that way in places. And, like, I feel like, oh my gosh, dealing with other transgender women is like that so much. I feel like there's all this cattiness built up because there's almost this, like, reward system that's like, the more stereotypically feminine you can be, like, the more likely society is to sort of let you be you and leave you alone about it, right? But it's dumb, and it's like, I only typically, younger transgender women fall into it sometimes too, but it seems like it's more of a symptomatic thing of older transgender women, and, like, that's gotta stop. So I look at myself in the mirror, and so like, I want to be one of these women that, like, actually, like, minds what I'm eating and goes to the gym and works out because I have goals for my body, right? And they involve my muscles, and, like, lots of women have these goals, be they cis, be they trans. It's not a masculine thing. It's an okay thing to do if you're masculine, but, you know, it's an okay thing to do if you're feminine too. And I think it's cool. So, and like a lot of other women who like women do. So just, like, there's this thing where, like, on Tumblr lately, with last year being the year of buff ladies, and, like, I feel like this year even more so, you're just seeing all these posts from other sapphic women floating around just validating over and over again that, like, yes, muscular women are beautiful and sexy. And, like, everyone who likes women knows this on the inside, right? But we have this, like, structure in society where a man is not allowed to admit this. Because if a man admits this, it means that he's, like, weird or gay or has a fetish or something like that. And, like, okay, so I find, like, all sorts of women's body types beautiful, and I feel like most lesbians do. I feel like there's so much beauty in a woman's soul and, like, her spirit and, like, who she is. Like, I like things like, you know, I think it's cute. Like there's some like Wiccan girls I know who like walk around barefoot everywhere they go, right? And have dirt on their feet, and like I feel like that's cute. It's like this connection to the earth, this like spiritual natural thing, right? But you know, women's body types are all beautiful and all different, and that variety is so wonderful. And but like for me, it's like I have my goals with my body type that's just me, and that's valid. And I look at my goals and I'm like, as a lesbian, I'm like, oh, I want that on me and I want that on me. That's my favorite way to put that. I feel like that's maybe like, I don't feel like that's even approaching vagina monologues level bold, but some people would say it is. And like, I feel intimidated from working out because I feel like I'm not allowed to, or else somehow it degrades my femininity, right? Except I know that's bullshit. But at the same time, I have this whole society that is built up telling women that it does. And it's all based on this whole thing that like men are afraid of strong women, right? So I've been seeing so many posts on Tumblr lately about this, and I wanted to talk about it because it's a prime example of toxic masculinity. This is like one of the most built-in characteristics of to the system. There's a system of starvation culture towards women, and a system of like, I almost want to call it bigorexic culture towards men, where you gotta be the most macho, toughest, biggest, hugest, beat the crap out of whatever. Who finds that attractive? I don't know if like there are any gay guys out there that do. I don't believe that there are any women that like guys who literally actually find the idea of like the most aggressive alpha, huge, just beat the shit out of, like, I don't think any of us find that attractive at all. And like, I feel like that's one of the fun things. I just have to break it because I can't be too serious all the time, or else I just get like, I get like so angry. But like, I feel like that's one of the fun things about like bodybuilding as a sport for women is I don't feel like that toxic masculine energy is there. I feel like there's just this whole, you know, sort of like this is cool. Look what I can do with my body. I am strong. I am good, strong lesbian waifu in my case. Would be like the thing. My partner, who is agender and very sappically attracted, although I believe they're pan, but they're always like teasing me on and like about like, because they think it's cute, they think it's attractive, like they think my goals are cool and stuff like that. But so men will tell you that building muscle or having too much muscle, because you come by it naturally whether you're trans or cis too. And they say that it's manly. It's not. They say that it's like, you know, unattractive, which it's not. And it's like there's this fear there where I'm like, I just don't get it, because like so many of our defining characteristics is like, just on the whole, it's like bell curves, yeah, but it's like I feel like there's a negative stereotype of women as frail based on like maybe in actuality that more of us are gentle and empathetic and not as prone to just like fits of spontaneous violence as men. Like, just there's outliers, obviously, but on the whole, you know. So I think it's silly. And I think it's even sillier. Even if, like, you're talking about a dude who's, like, okay, he's not worried that, like, you know, he, like, needs to be able to keep the physical upper hand on a woman. Maybe he's worried that, like, he'll be laughed at. You know? Or, like, called gay. Which, like, how confusing could that be? Like, I mean, if you're a girl who likes girls who are more muscular, then, like, you're obviously gay. Because you like girls. But, like, I would imagine, like, if it was a dude, like, that's so just, like, laughed at, I guess, almost. And, like, we shouldn't laugh at that. I don't feel like laughing at men, breaking out of toxic masculinity helps the fight to, like, end it. But I feel like getting down to the root of it does. And so, like, here's this whole thing. It's like the stereotypical example, because we build this idea into men that's like you're supposed to be big and macho and hunky, right? And if you're not the big hunky macho guy, you are not, like, acceptable. And the more feminine you are, the less acceptable you are. And the more you will be, like, derided and, like, subject to violence. And excuse me. I should get some water. But, like, we build in all these ideas that, like, if a man is not superior to a woman in every way, like, every woman, like, if ever there is a woman who's superior to a man in anything he cares about, because I guess a lot of guys don't care about, like, really, really, like, more feminine interests, but, like, some do, and that's valid. And, like, not all guys actually embrace this whole thing of toxic masculinity, but most do. And especially among, like, cis straight men. Although, I mean, like, I guess, like, among gay men, I don't know if this is as much of a thing. I imagine that it probably still is, because I feel like gay men are a lot of times, unfortunately, really shitty towards women, especially transgender women. There's a lot of the T-slur. There's a lot of, like, oh, why don't you go just be gay? And it's like, I'm sorry, I busted into my Southern a little bit. I am Southern. But, like, they don't realize that it's like, you could be a gay girl like me, and that gender and orientation are also, like, totally different things. I don't get how that can even happen sometimes, because, like, I feel like there's this whole, like, really toxic idea that's pushed too, that, like, the exact other way around, that, like, you know, orientation and is, like, somehow a gender issue, and it's like, no. It's just, you know, you like who you like. It depends on the gender of the person that you like, right? That's what orientation is. It's the gender of the people you like in comparison to your own gender, right? So, you know, it's got nothing to do with a misperception of one's own gender. And just, like, you know, someone identifying with a gender other than they were assigned at birth, like, we know, we have all the evidence in the studies there that this is natural and normal. Just, like, not common, because we know that there are links between intersex conditions and the processes that lead to intersex conditions and people identifying as transgender too. And, like, oh my gosh, I don't want to sound transmedicalist, because I'm not, first of all. And, like, I don't believe in the Western gender binary, but it's like, there's this point where there's different ways of being trans, you know? Like, you can be non-binary. You can be gender non-conforming, like that one person. And feel as though, like, you look at things and you're like, your interests are lying in other places. Right? And gender roles are another social construct, and they're just based on misogyny. They're based on this idea that some things are women's things and some things are men things. And furthermore, they're based on the idea that women's things are, like, the only appropriate things for women. And that they're totally inappropriate for men, because to engage in them makes a man inferior. Huge problem, right? That's sexist. That is sexist and absurd. So being muscular is one of these things, right? And it's like, if you are a woman who's muscular, it's like people, like, it's like they'll start all sorts of bullshit. I feel like that's one of the many ways to be misgendered as a cis woman. You know, if you're cis, like, for people to misgender you, like they call you a man, or like if they're transphobic, maybe compare you to being trans, which, I mean, you know, if you're not transphobic, you know, is nothing to be offended by, but, you know, still it's like, you look at it and you wonder, it's like, I just went to the gym and decided that I wanted to get bigger and like started picking up weights and eating tons of calories and food and protein and shit like that, right? And it's like, you see yourself as a woman, right? It's like, but it's gender non-conforming because it's like, you know, you are performing outside of what is allowed for your gender. See, it's like, that's why it's like, you look at the whole Western gender binary, it breaks down. It just doesn't fit anymore. And there's like so many people like, you know, what was it? Because gender non-conforming and being like agender and like not experiencing gender, that's not the same at all. Because someone who's gender non-conforming and is like a woman but has interests which she's supposed to like not be allowed to, or they're manly or whatever, and I feel like it's more acceptable to be a tomboy than it used to be in a lot of ways, right? But there's a lot of things that are still just like, if it feels like it's okay until you're threatening a man, right? And when I say threatening a man, I don't mean like, obviously, like, you know, abusively threatening a man, like, I'm gonna beat you up or something like that. I mean, like, you know, until a man is fearing that his masculinity based on his perceived superiority is like under your threat because you're better at something than him, it's okay. But then once you get to that point, it's like the male ego shatters and the man is like, doesn't know what to do and has to resort to some type of violence, whether it's like social violence or physical violence. And I don't feel like that's a natural male condition. I don't feel like that's a natural way for a man to be. I feel like that's a way that we have built our society to be because of toxic masculinity. It leads to violence against women in so many ways. It leads to the promotion of rape culture, and it leads to other things that are more social, like this whole stigmatization of being a muscular woman, right? And it's like, we don't care, we do it anyway, right? Well, I mean, most of us. For me, it's been like super, super duper difficult because like I've been worried about like the influence of my hormones on my body. Knowing that I'm on hormone replacement therapy now and that my body is not going to like develop like you know, a cis man who was assigned male at birth's body would, because I mean my body is a little bit different anyway. Because I also, like, say if I did identify as male at birth, I wouldn't be able to identify as cis either under the construct of including paracis. But thankfully for me, I don't have to worry about that because I am a woman. Like, that's just my gender. It's always been that way as long as I can remember. It's always where I felt fit in and the most accepted and the most comfortable. And so I wrote this post, right? Just like expressing my positivity. Because, and like at the same time trying to break it down. Just literally being like, you know, I didn't start it too well. Nah, fuck that shit. I feel like I started it well enough. But someone didn't like it. You know, some man, like, and I feel like this is so sad. There are literally men who troll my page, waiting for me to say something that, like, if they report it, the Facebook algorithms will, like, pick it up as, like, being like, oh, this is hateful towards a group of people or whatever, and, like, they just take it down, right? I feel like the algorithm, like, tends to assume with text posts. And like, they just manually review it if you actually, like, have them do it. But so, this started as a Tumblr post, so it was very Tumblrly worded. And, if that's a word. And, it started out with me saying, so, men are weak and pathetic. I'm gonna let that sink in for a second. Excuse me. Like I said, I'm sick as a dog. But just, like, I have so much to get off my chest. I have other things to get out from inside of my chest. Women have bodily functions, and being gross and, like, immature about that is weird. And, like, I was thinking about, earlier today, I was thinking about, like, the ways that, I could have said that. I could have said that a different way. I could have said, like, being a sissy about it, but, like, that implies that femininity is weak and pathetic. And guys imply that femininity and womanhood is weak and pathetic all the time. Womanhood is strong as fuck. Like, I feel like I hate how timid I feel like I became after a lot of the violence I went through. And I've been looking for that bold fucking feminist who says shit like it is and isn't afraid to tackle the difficult topics. Right? I look at myself that way. And I'm like, where did this girl go? And I want that back. It's weird because, like, there's so many, like, women who are in bodybuilding that I look up to. Like, I don't see myself competing on a stage one day, but, like, you know, I'm the kind of girl who, like, in my career at some point, I want to be like Madonna or Lady Gaga, where people in the papers or on the bus are being like, hey, have you seen, like, how swole they are lately? And... like, so I don't see myself being, and I'm just like, I'm not a very competitive person. Like, I like to compete with myself and push myself to do better, right? And so, but I had this one woman I looked up to who, like, she described this, like, how she got into it, and it's like, she said she felt like a junkyard dog. Like, she'd been through so much abuse, and she just didn't want a man to be able to hurt her again, right? So, like, maybe, I don't know, it's like, I feel like there's this whole thing where it's like, men fear strong women. At least, like, weak and pathetic men who embody toxic masculinity, right? Like, I hope if you're a dude watching this, and you were about to be like, well, the not all men, that, you know, you better be, like, agreeing, you know? Because that's the whole point. It's like, if you're disagreeing with a feminist, and you're disagreeing with a woman on a women's issue where her life is impacted by all of the, like, toxic constructs that toxic masculinity and male entitlement and, like, male fragility builds for us to have to tiptoe around, it's like, then you're not one of the not all men. You're one of the reasons that we need feminism, and it's like, you can't keep pulling that card, okay? So, it's like, it is a little bit different for me. My body it's been different my whole life, in ways that are very typical to Klinefelters, which is usually present in people with like, either a double X and a Y chromosome, or triple X and a Y chromosome, or sometimes there's, like, mosaic forms of it where a person's cells are actually technically could have formed, you know, multiple people, but formed one person. It happens in all mammals, and, you know, but I have a lot of presentations that are, like, really, really similar with that, and I've had them my whole life. Like, my parents wondered and took me to the hospital over and over again over why I couldn't gain weight my whole life, right? And all throughout like high school and my adult life, everyone's made fun of what they call my childbearing hips, because my hips are very broad and feminine, and the rest of my frame is very feminine. And my face is very sort of like, I mean, you know, the effects of testosterone and puberty are there, but it's very sort of feminine, and, like, I didn't get the kind of thickness of facial hair that, like, most people who go through that kind of puberty get. Other parts of my body, you know, obviously also were a bit different in ways. You know, even before starting hormone replacement therapy, I've been seen by other people who know that they're intersex and that they were altered, and who looked at me and, like, you know, and I'm talking about looked at my private parts because we were in a relationship, and, like, told me that, like, I looked like I had been altered the same way. Which is, like, so difficult to tell without, like, hospital examination, right? But it's like, as it all stands, people have always, like, seen me as different and feminine in, like, my body and my mannerisms and things like that. I thought it was funny that only after I came out did that become an issue. But it's like, that's one of the things, because you're like, you look at it and you're like, oh my gosh, is this gonna make my life more difficult? Like, are people going to be, like, more just, like, likely to treat me like my gender is less of a serious matter than other people's, just because I have this gender non-conforming interest, right? Which once again, it's different from being non-binary, because that's a totally different experience of gender. The way that we look at the identities of man and woman are very sort of rooted in the gender binary, and like I don't feel like they have to be. I feel like that's the thing, is I almost feel like cis people feel threatened by the idea that getting rid of the gender binary invalidates their genders, but it doesn't. Like, being a woman or being a man is still, like, it's such a super, it's a feeling. I just want to say that it's like, I don't feel like it's a quality, because I feel like we can talk about it. I feel like it just gets difficult when we get into misogynistic gender roles and things like that. But, like, you know, when you look at it overall as a whole, it's like, well, yeah, it's a spectrum, but obviously there are going to be people who feel very one way. Like, let's use colors as an example. Even though, you know, I feel like the idea of colors as boys' colors and girls' colors is weird. I feel like most trans people feel that way. But let's say we'll represent women with blue just to be arbitrary, since I'm a Tumblr feminist, and we'll represent men with pink. And those are colors, right? Sorry. I forgot how to drink from this cup for a second. But it's gonna be like one of the most memorable moments on my entire channel. I know it. I just know it. But like, I want to see a gif of that now. Delia forgets how to drink out of a cup of water. But anyway, like, they're colors. They're on the spectrum. They're not the only colors there. There's like, you know, there's like varying shades of white and gray and red and blue and purple and green and yellow and all this shit, right? Like, every color of the rainbow, right? And every variation, every shade and tone. So, like, it's a metaphor. But those colors are still there. Just because there's more colors doesn't mean the colors that you related with weren't valid. It means that there's just more colors to relate to. And that's great, right? But, like, genders instead, okay? I feel like that's another one of the things, is, like, there's ways that are broadly gender differences in the ways that, like, people perceive colors, I feel. But I also feel that, like, that's one of those studies that's based on samples where the gender and sex are assumed to be the same, because there's this whole societal assumption that everyone's cis. And so many people are non-binary. So many people are not even just gender non-conforming cis people. They look at it and they're like, I feel like the gender construct of Western society doesn't suit me. I don't fit into either of these two categories, and that's so valid. Or sometimes people feel like they float between them and are gender fluid. That's valid. Sometimes people are like, I don't get gender, and they're like, they're agender, and that's valid. And sometimes people are just like, well, I'm cis and that's valid, I'm paracis and that's valid, I'm trans and that's valid. But interesting that it's like, it seems almost assumed by the existence of the word paracis, which it's a word, like, you can look it up, that, like, the intersex people are all supposed to be trans, because, like, we're all supposed to fit into this binary system, and we don't have to. Like, you can be non-binary, you can be gender non-conforming, you can be whoever you want to be, and, like, I feel like there's a very specific way of being trans, and, like, you know, the way that most cis people think of, which is, like, struggling with dysphoria, and I think that they reduce it to genitals, but it's so much the whole body. Like, I had so many fears growing up with my body, right? And, like, it led me away from physical activity, whereas, like, I had this, like, whole thing, it created such a complex world for me inside my head, where it's, like, even growing up as a little girl, seeing heavy metal fantasy shit from D&D video games, I wanted to be one of the buff chicks, because it's fucking awesome, right? And, like, even before, like, you know, when it was, like, you know, the kind of girl that you see, it's like, you know, fitness magazine cover back then was, like, the heavy metal standard. I feel like it was less, like, bodybuilding looking chicks back then, but, like, You know, that's the push that, like, so many feminists, like, were pushing for. It's like, when you give us muscular options for women in video games, like, when you allow that, which, like, as if it were yours to allow or deny, if you're gonna have them for men, like, you should have them for women too, or it's sexist. And you should have non-binary options, or that's transphobic. You know, and some video games do this very, very well, by the way. The standard that so many women are like, you give us at least this, right? Okay? Because it's like we're all different. Our bodies are all different, right? And, like, that was one of the cool things that, like, I was worried about. I'm not sure if I was worried more about society or more about, like, my body, but, like, worrying about, like, okay, so I don't want to build muscle like someone who like is like male, because it's like everything about that to me is just, like, so the opposite of how I feel and how I relate to my own body. And it's like, it's so weird because it's like, you wonder, it's like, how does that connect with your gender? And I'm like, well, the science says that like, you know, my brain is more like a cis woman's, and okay, and that the way that, like, in my case, that my body responds to hormones, and definitely the way that my brain responds to hormones, is a little bit more like a cis woman's than it is like a cis man's. And, like, for me, obviously part of that is just, like, the physiology of it, you know, just like my fucking childbearing hips that I got made fun of forever, and now I'm like, hey, they're building up a nice booty, and they're building up some nice hip fat, and, like, you know, on progesterone, in addition to estrogen, it's like, I feel like my legs are building up a little bit more. There's all these myths around, like, women and physical strength. And it all seems to be rooted around this idea that, like, that we're not allowed to exceed at physical strength and, like, muscularity and shit like that. And it's like, excuse me, but, like, the guys who are all that beefy didn't get that way just being born that way. Like, testosterone does a little bit for size. Like, if you do the research on everything about exercise science, like, you'll find eventually that there's a lot of differences in the way that male and female, I'm going to put it that way, but it's more like estrogen influenced and progesterone influenced and, like, testosterone influenced muscle builds on the body, like size to strength ratios and things like that, which have to do a lot with, like, the influences testosterone has on water weight, etc. But, like, I love the way that, like, it's like pushing this idea that it's like, you know, validating strong women and muscular women is, like, it's so ego shattering. It really is. I like that, because it's like, when you can boil it all down and get it to where it is, which is this whole point of you fear strong women because you are a weak, pathetic man who is weak and pathetic and has given into toxic masculinity and is being misogynist and it's full of bullshit. It's like, I love that we're just all calling everyone out on this right now, because it's just like, so it's been such a hot button issue for me. Like, it's something I had to come out about, that I thought women who are muscular were attractive, because as someone who outwardly identified myself to the world as male during a part of my life, even if I never internally felt that way, it was like, it wasn't, like, really loud, but, like, I came out to a girlfriend about it when I was in middle school. It feels like a weird thing to have to come out about, right? Because it's totally normal, right? Regardless of your gender, it seems like a natural thing to come out about if you're a girl, because you're a lesbian. And so for me, it was, but it wasn't, because, like, that's not how the world looked at me, even if I called myself a lesbian back then. I just said male lesbian. I feel like that's internalized transphobia, but I had a lot of it. So did a lot of people. You know, most women internalize misogyny until we grow out of it and become feminists, right? So, but anyway. She laughed at me about it, which I don't feel like is the appropriate response. I feel like it would be like, fuck yeah, buff women are hot, right? And, like, start telling people, and it's like, whoa, if someone comes out to you about something, it's because they feel like there's a societal stigma, and you should probably be privileged with that information. But this is also the same woman who, like, when I was, growing up in Catholic and, like, believed that, like, sex before marriage was, like, gonna damn my eternal soul before I, became atheist and then converted to Wicca, which figured that one out. But, like, whatever, I abandoned the idea of that as nonsense at a point in my life. I abandoned the idea of virginity because it's a misogynist construct, which is based around the idea of women as property and meant to mainly be inflicted there. Because, like, let's face it, as a society, it's like most of the time, it's like men are not really held to that standard. Like, if you grow up in, like, a super religious place like I did, sure. But, like, and for me, it's like, I never really related the construct, like, when I was young, because I feel like it's so ingrained that, like, if you're in the religious part of it, you just never even think about gender with regards to it. You're just like, oh, you're going to hell. But, like, it really is. It's like, it's such a misogynistically rude construct, but, like, the way society would have applied to me, trying to treat me like a dude, would be like, the more you score, the better it is, right? And so it made high school weird for me because I definitely had this complex of, like, my virginity is sacred and important, and, like, people who were my close friends definitely saw me as a girl, but, like, people who didn't know me as well, I guess they only maybe had the cover to judge by, but even though they did, it's like, I was always picked on over my body. I was always picked on over my mannerisms. I was always picked on over everything, called a girl. I think one of my favorite examples was, like, when I feel like dating, like, became such a shy place for me, was after middle school, where, like, I wrote a letter to a girl asking her out to a dance. And, like, this was my standard procedure for asking another girl out. I feel like it's very standard procedure for, like, any girl who likes girls. It's like, it's a very girly thing to do. And so, like, this girl read the letter to her whole bus, right? And, like, everyone made my life a living hell over it. But, like, that's just one example. People, like, picked up on my girlish mannerisms, but it's like after you come out, it's like all of a sudden that's when people want to start invalidating you. I guess it's because maybe, like, in my case, I'm on YouTube. I've got more exposure. I was a bit of a local celebrity in my own hometown for a little bit. And you just, you get so used to sort of, like, I guess, like, it's weird because, like, when people know you, it's like, even if they come into the situation not really understanding, because I feel like it's a little bit typical for cis people to, like, think of transness backwards. Like, they think of it as a boy who wants to be a girl, and it's like, no, it's a girl, right? And that's just in the case of, like, a transgender woman, which I talk about mostly my experiences with transness, and I like to try to include non-binary people as much as I can, but it's like, I don't feel like I can, like, I identify as non-binary myself because I feel like the whole gender binary is bullshit, and I feel like my lived experiences of gender are a little bit different than the average woman's because of the way the gender binary impacts me. So I feel like a non-binary woman, right? Not that difficult to understand. I don't feel masculine anyway, and, like, I never really have, and I never wanted to, but, like, it was expected of me, pushed of me, and, like, it's like I was punished in ways for not being masculine enough, and, like, I'd say masculine at all, right? And it's just such a ew. There's all these, like, little gritty things to unwrap around everything, and it gets so frustrating. There's so much to talk about, and I feel like I've been so quiet for so long that it's just like it's all pouring out in this podcast. Where it's like, I wish I had a desk so I could have a piece of paper in front of me to be like, I'm drifting. But at the same time, I feel like talking about these things in a very sort of real way that gets into everything is important, because after a while you're like, how did this get so complex? And, like, where did we, like, even, like, where did we even begin? Right? Where did we even begin? Where do we even begin, right? Where did we even begin to get into, like, such a web of topics, and, like, how do we even start unraveling them, right? And this is sort of my life. As a transgender woman who admires buff ladies and wants to be one, right? So I made this post, and this guy got butthurt. Whoever did this is so sad. I feel so sorry for him. reports me, and I'm banned from Facebook for 24 hours, so I was bored today, which is why I'm filming even though I'm sick. And I plan on doing more like off-cue podcasts like this, because one of my last therapists, told me that, like, I should be. Like, they looked at me with everything I was doing and everything I wanted to do in my career, and they're like, you know what, like, as your therapist, and like they get to like deal with all the darkest parts and all the most confused parts and all the most like what on earth parts of me, right? And like they're like, you should talk about these things on YouTube, and like you should just go smoke a bowl and like go to your YouTube and talk about the shit that's pissing you off. Cause that's what Demi Lovato does. She says to me, and she's like, and you remind me of that, so you should do that. I don't know if Demi Lovato actually does that. I know she has a YouTube channel, but I'm not quite sure what she does with it. But this is like what my therapist is saying. It's just like, go get high, like do your own self-talk therapy on YouTube, right, when you're feeling rough. I feel like so many women could benefit from that, couldn't we? I feel like we have so much to get off our chest at times. But like, I feel like if we all started unpacking these backpacks together more often, it would be helpful, because like we can look at society and we can be like, okay, men are weak and pathetic, right? And I feel like it's such a double standard. It's so sexist that like men call us weak and pathetic all the time, right? Like they use the word pussy as like meaning weak and pathetic, and I was called a pussy all my life, and it was supposed to mean weak and pathetic. First off, total bullshit. What on the fuck is weak and pathetic about a muscular organ that can give birth to a whole child, right? And second, even regardless to like the fact that, okay, some chicks have dicks, some people who have pussies are not women. Some people who have pussies are men. And it's like some people identify with the word pussy regardless of the structure of their genitalia, and it's like, the whole point is there's this association between femininity and weakness, and it's like, I don't get it. I don't get if it's just because we're not full up on toxic masculinity and senseless violence and like rape culture and shit like that. And obviously, like, MRAs try to burst into conversations like this, right? And they try to burst in and be like, what are you saying, that like women are incapable of violence and abuse and like rape and stuff like that? No. My rapist was a woman. And like, I couldn't go to the police because I'm a transgender woman of color. Like, when I was beaten by my own family after I came out, the police pulled tasers on me while I was unarmed in my fucking bedroom. Just because I screamed and backed away when they came in the door after I had been beaten. And they were there to take me to a hospital. And I wanted to press charges because I'd been beaten. And I wasn't allowed to. Not to mention that I've been through police brutality before. It's scary as fuck when you're a transgender woman of color to feel like it's like you need the help. It's like you need the law or something on your side, and it's not there. There's just no justice for you. You feel like you can't go to anyone about the sexual violence you just endured, right? I don't know that that's a unique feeling to being a transgender woman, but I feel like it's definitely different than being a cisgender woman. But like, we have these conversations and like MRAs want to burst in and be like, all just not recognizing that there is an issue with the fact that it's like all the statistics are gendered. We've been able to trace all of the bullshit that leads to it. We just have to change a few things. We have to change society to stop raising men to view women as objects instead of actors. We need to stop raising a society where men view women as possessions or something that they're entitled to. Like being a lesbian and dealing with violence from men who feel entitled to you. Just a thing that transgender women deal with too, because big shocker, straight men like us. I know, I've been there. And I don't really like men, for the most part. But, like, there's exceptions. I'm like that lesbian who is probably technically pan, but just, like, I don't understand men, I don't get men, I don't like dealing with men, and just women are so wonderful and wholesome in every way, and amazing, and, like, see, I'm just a total lesbian with an occasional exception, I guess. You can frame that however you want. It's your identity. In my case, it's mine, but you know. Excuse me. So I can frame that however I want. You get what I mean. We just have to stop raising our society to embody this, but we don't have to only do that. We have to actually actively change the patterns that are there now. We have to hold men who commit violence against women accountable. We should be holding everyone who commits violence against anyone accountable, right? But, like, we're not holding men who exhibit violence against women accountable. Like, society has this whole, once again, toxic masculinity construct where it's like, a man's not allowed to admit that he's being abused or has been abused by a woman because he's supposed to be bigger and stronger and more aggressive and dominant. All these toxic fucking constructs that, like, they have nothing to do with anything. You know? And, like, okay. So we're trying to deconstruct all that, right? Because we should be. Right? So, anyway, I feel like I started this post off necessarily the best way because I'm like, so men are weak and pathetic, but it's not untrue with regards to the subject. I mean, not all men are weak and pathetic about buff ladies, but, like, you know, and I'm not counting, like, macho-ness, like, you know, if you're gonna be all Johnny Bravo about it and be like, oh, I could take him out, I'm not afraid, or, like, whatever, it's like, you know, like, that thing where it's like your masculinity feels threatened by, like, any woman being better than you at anything, whether it's, like, being more muscular when you live in a society that tells you that, like, part of your job as a man is to be muscular. It's so silly, right? But that's, like, part of the thing that we do. So we need to stop. And I love just being able to join, like, all the other feminists on Tumblr calling this out. Okay. But I do it on Facebook and I get banned for 24 hours. So it's like, I could be pissed about that, right? But, like, I look at it as a little bit of a blessing in disguise because, like, it gave me a reason to find something else to do with my day than, like, bitch on my social media all day. Instead, I could come and bitch around in circles on YouTube, right? And it's like, so I started with this podcast with a few possible topics to talk about, and this was one of them. And this is the way my mind works, and this is the way I think and talk. It weaves in and out of things, it tries to break things down, it relates them to myself and, like, the world and the constructs I live in, right? It's a human thing. But I feel like I go off on tangents a lot. At the same time, though, it's just, like, I feel like this is the reason why my therapist was right. Why, like, vlogging like this is super good for me. Because of the fact that it's like, whoa, these are complex issues I run through my head all day because, oh my gosh, life at the intersections I'm at, it's really complex, right? Like, it's this, the whole idea of, like, gender non-conforming, like, you could tack that on if you feel like building muscle in a sense that, like, it's bodybuilding-ish, but, like, not for the purposes of competing, but just, like, because I have goals for my physique, is, like, you know, under the system of misogynist gender roles, it's gender non-conforming for any woman to do, right? But, like, it's not actually gender non-conforming, it's gender role non-conforming. There's nothing about the gender of a woman that says that we're not allowed to be fat too. And it's like, I wish men would stop finding it so threatening. And I feel like if I say something like that, I would hope that the response would be for men to like look at each other and look at themselves and be like, oh, well, geez, better, grow up about this. And like stop being a little whiny piss baby about it. If like I looked in the mirror and was like, oh, this is me. But instead the reaction is like to get your feelings hurt over it, and have to go and push a button to like report it or dislike a video or whatever. The dislike button I love as a YouTuber. I feel like if I see that being pressed, I look at it every single time and I'm like, oh, somebody was like, there was some dude out there or something who was like, or I mean, could be, I don't know, could be a cis woman, could be a white person, someone who disagrees with me because I'm of color, or someone who disagrees with me because I'm a woman, someone who disagrees with me because I'm a woman who happens to be transgender. They were so perturbed that they just had to click that little button. No comment. No formulated argument based on fallacies that I've either already covered in other videos or like will, because I get sick of having to do it all day every day in my regular like life walking around, right? And they just have to click the dislike button, right? I feel like it's such a weak gesture. It's just like, oh no, my video hurt your feelings. Cry me a river, Women's lives are more important than fragile masculinity. They're more important than a man's hurt feelings, because he has to look in the mirror and admit that like maybe he's not being a real like manly example of a man if he's going to be insecure about a woman being better at something than him, no matter whether it's like a dude's thing or a girl's thing, or even like the stereotypical dude bros dude thing, right? I feel like that's another reason why I love this topic, is because it's just such an example. And they actually used it on Johnny Bravo once, and I feel like the way they did it was not... There was so much opportunity, there was so much potential, right? But like, I feel like it's like, my partner's pushing me and be like, yeah, you're just as valid as any cis girl who does that. But like, I look at myself as a trans girl and I'm like, but like, they're gonna tell me I don't belong if like I went to compete, right? And it's like, I don't know how that works all days, because there's a transgender woman who competes in that, and it's just like, I just like the look, okay, and like the feel of like strength, okay, and like I like the way that like my other partners respond to that, right? If they think it's cute or sexy or whatever. And like, it is like being a woman with muscles, it's cute, it's sexy, it's one of many ways to be cute and sexy and valid and beautiful and wonderful. And like, your body is not masculine, it's not manly if that's you. And if you're a girl who likes other girls and you've ever wondered if it's weird, it's not. And if you're a dude who's ever wondered if it's weird, it's not. And it's like, oh my gosh, we do such things. We do such things with the way that, like, we like, oh my gosh, I feel like there's so many ways. It's like, if a woman is like viewed as like different from like the stereotypical mold of womanhood, which fits none of us, right? Like, are there any of us that the stereotypical mold of womanhood fits 100%? I don't believe so. And like, when you're in that situation, you don't fit the mold 100%. Society, it's like, I feel like it looks at you and it's like, any little way, this is all women, I feel, any little way that they can like chip away and be like, we're taking away a bit of your pink card, if you will, because this is a masculine interest, and so we're making you a little bit less valid or attractive in the eyes of men, right? Lesbians over here, we're like, heyo, we don't care because we don't have all of these standards built in. Like, we don't have this masculine need to be better or superior. And once again, it's just like, I look at it and I'm like, I don't feel like that's the natural male state. And like, okay, I have maybe no room to talk because I'm a woman. I have no idea what being a man is like. All I know is that, like, there's privileges that come with it. And that there's, like, all of these ways that we, like, push media at men and push messages at men. Saying that, like, all they have to do is self-actualize and they're owed a woman. And, like, we have all these messages portraying women as, like, inferior, like, we're not supposed to be as smart, we're not supposed to be as strong, we're not supposed to be as brave, we're not supposed to be as capable, we're not supposed to be as dedicated, we're not supposed to be as even just, like, good at nerdy trivia, right? Because I'm a gamer geek. Like I said, like, I grew up with my like, attraction, like, really specifically towards, like, when I see a muscular woman, I'm like, damn. I feel like a lot of women who like women are. But, like, so if you're a woman who is muscular, then I guess this video is for you, too. Just as much as it is for, like, women who are wondering if it's weird to, like, find that attractive, or men who need to be shut up and corrected. On like being, like, so fucking derisive and dismissive and like making an interest difficult for a woman to pursue just because of the fact that there's a whole fucking, like, construct in the way there. But, like, I feel like it's like, you don't let that get in the way if you really want to pursue that. There's that extra layer for me, but it's like, am I gonna, like, get in the way? No, but it's taken, like, so much, like, of my partner's reassuring is like that it's like, it's not manly. And it's like, I know this already, but it's like, I have to fight this whole thing where it's like, knowing that, okay, if society looks at like for example, and this could be with anything, like, they look at a celebrity like Lady Gaga, or like, Lady Gaga could have been a man, or like, was she a man, or whatever. And it's like, this was the thing when Lady Gaga came out, right? And I feel like people kind of let it go after Telephone, which I'm not sure if it was the best way to address it, because I feel like it was a little, it just doesn't sit right, the way it was done exactly with me as a transgender woman. But I also, like, you know, you have to consider the fact that a person can only work from their own perspectives until they learn better, and then they make up for it. You know, like, she's a huge ally for trans rights. But she had so many, and that's wonderful. That's the way it should be. But she had so many ugly people trying to say that she was a man, or basically actually sort of trying to imply that she was transgender. I love how I love when cis women who are not transphobic do not take that as an insult. Because if you're not, you shouldn't. Cis beauty is valid, trans beauty is valid. There's no one thing that cis looks like or trans looks like. But, like, you know, say someone looks at Lady Gaga and says that for some reason something about her is masculine or manly or something, right? Well, if she identifies as a woman, then nothing about her is masculine. If someone identifies as a man, then nothing about them is necessarily feminine. Like, okay, big argument start there, right? We all have our internal masculinity and femininity, and we all need to balance them and embrace them, right? It's a very non-binary sounding perspective, but I feel like everyone, like, tries to say that, but, like, they try to say as trans people to invalidate us, to be like, oh, you just need to get in touch with your feminine side, you know, or actually maybe get out of touch with it, I feel, is what someone would say. They'd be like, you need to get more in touch with your masculine side, you're out of balance, or something like that. But, excuse me. But it's like, that's not the way it works, because we don't all sort of find ourselves in this middle humdrum la la land, do we? No, we're very passionate about our identities, right? We all are. I wish more people who are not trans would think about that. we're all very passionate about our identities. And, like, this is the thing, though. I feel like if I was a cis woman, I wouldn't look at my interest in weightlifting and building muscle as, like, any more. I don't feel like I would look at it as masculine if I was a cis woman, and, like, I don't look at it as masculine as a trans woman. I look at it as just, like, a non-gendered thing. Some people want to work out. Let them work out. But, like, oh my gosh, has this been a complicated issue for me in my life in, like, so many ways. And, like, something I'm so passionate about. So, like, it's so aggravating on the one hand to make that post and put it up and have a man just, like, come by and just, like, say, oh, this hurts my feelings, when it's like men say things about women all the time to call us weak and pathetic in so many different ways and just slut shame us and dehumanize us. And, like, you know, women who have been victims and survivors of rape and domestic violence who are, you know, looked at as like, oh, you know, she was a slut or she was a bitch, so she deserved it. You know, and we hand men excuses left and right. We tell men to bottle their feelings because having feelings and emotions is a woman thing. But then when you are a woman, at the same time, society tells you that your emotions are too extreme. And men tell you that you're crazy because of your emotions. And gaslight you about the severity of your experiences and the validity of your experiences and things that you feel, just like they gaslight us about the validity of everything about ourselves, right? I don't get it. I don't get what this whole thing is of men feeling like women need to be inferior in order for them to be valid. It just, to me, it doesn't seem like it's the natural male condition. But at the same time, it's like, well, it's the way society is, but how long have we constructed it that way? And we can stop constructing it that way. The lovely thing about social constructs is that you can reevaluate them with new and better information and, like, new and better ideas and change the way that they work instead of making excuses for them and violently clinging to them and, like I almost want to read this post because of the fact that it was so sort of just entirely like, oh my gosh, and there's so much in the chat. Oh my gosh, I want to tackle this, like, hey everyone, I didn't know that so many people were going to be there. There's 2 people in the YouTube chat, but, like, so many people to me, because I just made an off the cuff live video, right? 2 people in the chat, so many. No idea how many people are watching, don't care. But I'll have to get to that in a minute. But I want to read this post, is what I want to do. Because, to me, I look at it and it's like, I got a message on Facebook that's like, your post has been removed for hate speech and you can't post for 24 hours. So I'm like, okay. So, men say whatever they want about women. Like, we're weak and pathetic, right? Just like, I'm like, men are weak and pathetic. And this is my point of view on men being weak and pathetic. It's like, if you can't handle a woman being better than you, it's something that's weak. If you feel like women are inferior to you or have to be inferior for you to feel good about yourself as a man, that's weak. No one's interested in that. Like, when, I feel like there's this whole thing when, you know, society wants to, like, what is it, like sort of the whole dude bear friend zone type MRA person who would want to push, like, this whole idea that, like, and it's like saying it just like, it's like it hurts on your tongue even trying to frame it, because it's like I don't even understand this whole frame of mind at all. Like, I was one of those people who was like, to the world on the outside, everyone looked at me as like, oh boy, his penis equals boy. which is wrong, but like whatever. And like they looked at me and like, you know, I had a lot of issues like with dating in my life because I was looked at as not worthy of love because of being feminine, right? But like, okay, I'm a girl. Like, I only want to date girls who are into girls. So it's not a problem, right? But like there's this whole thing where guys have issues with like dating, and they want to blame it on like, oh, nice guys finish last and shit like that, just because we're like, you need to be mature, you need to grow up, you need to be a man, you need to be strong. And I don't always know that the way we push it is the best. Like when I'm like, oh, men are weak and pathetic, it's like, can I be gentler? Yeah. But like, here's the thing, when I do that, it's like, how is a man gonna react? Well, in this case, exactly like I expected him to. He like played right into it, right? He really did, because now I have a whole fucking topic to rant about, right? About how pathetic this whole thing is. That it's like, it's a prime example. It's like, you just proved me right. You were so weak and pathetic that like you saw this post being positive for muscular women, and like, I don't know what it is, dude. Like, I don't know if you just like, your body is like not what you want it to be or whatever, but like, or I don't know if it's because society built up some ridiculous standard for you, but I feel like men whine about these things. I'm just saying it, I'm just calling it like I see it. I feel like men whine about these things. Like if a man doesn't want to fit the mold, or doesn't feel like he does, or is more in touch with I guess if he considers it his feminine side, because, you know, to be fair, some people do, even on the binary, they feel like they have a masculine and a feminine side, they need to bring the balance. That's a spiritual thing for some people, and, you know, if that's your thing, then do you, but maybe you're non-binary. I feel like my femininity is defined by being a woman. I feel like the things I do are feminine because I'm a woman doing them. I feel like just, you know, any woman by nature being a woman is just like feminine, and the things that we do are feminine, and a man is masculine, the things that they do are masculine. And the way that we have things coded as like, no, this is always feminine, no, this is always masculine, is bullshit. Because it fucks with the way people want to live their lives. And it's not just women that deal with problems from this. Misogyny hurts everyone. There's just an unfair burden towards women because of the fact that maleness is privileged. It's rewarded. It's looked at as positive. Especially within the framework of toxic masculinity. The more toxically masculine you are, the more like privileges that earns you. It's disgusting. It hurts men. It hurts non-binary people. And it makes it so that when men hurt women, they get away with it. And really, it encourages men to hurt women in so many ways. It encourages them to look at us as property. And objects. That they exist for their benefit, for their sexual pleasure, for their procreation. And like that part really gets me, because like I obviously don't exist for like any man's procreation, not even a transgender man's, who could like get pregnant if he wanted to, if I was capable of producing a child, which at this point I highly doubt. But so anyway, you know, that one always gets me. And also because, like, you know, I was in a position once where, you know, I had to drive someone to an abortion. I was, like, super, super duper duper judged for it, and so were they. And it was because each of the people who loved us, like, they looked at her as being responsible for providing a grandchild, right? And it's like, you know, she's not even their daughter, right? And they look at her as like a body for their use. That's how my mom looked at someone I dated once. But, women can internalize misogyny too, and we need to stop because it causes problems. So let me read this post. Excuse me. I'm gonna drink some water before I read this post. So, men are weak and pathetic. And for years, I was led to believe that I had a fetish of some kind. Just because I found muscular women, super attractive. Sorry. I got tongue-tied there on the C. It didn't want to form in my mouth for some reason. Which seemed to be in contrast with, society. But I've since come to understand that that's only because patriarchal society frames it as unattractive, manly, etc. Literally just because men are afraid of strong women, and literally just make that shit up purely to encourage frailty and starvation culture, which is fucking disgusting. Literally. All this whole same construct where men want women to be frail and weak so that they can have power over us, and fear a woman who is not able to be quote-unquote put in our place, I guess, if need were to so arise. That's how deep this goes. I feel like it goes past a fear of oh, what if she hurts me or something like that, which it's really, come on. Do you worry about that when you're selecting your friends to bro around with? Are you worried it's oh no, shit, this dude could, clock my lights out. I don't want to be his friend, and if you do, then, oh my gosh, guy society is, even more fucked up then. And it's but whatever. Although I guess with a guy I could get, because, as a woman, if I were a woman who was into dudes, actually, if a dude was too muscular for me, it would be a turn off. If a dude was, too physically powerful for me in some way, it would be a turn off, because I would look at that with fear of and very justified, because men are just violent towards women all the time, especially transgender women. And so by looking, it's just what's the emasculation? There's nothing less valid about you or less manly about you for any reason just because a woman is better than you at something. Doesn't matter how society genders the interest, it's not. Let me finish reading this. So men are weak and pathetic, and for years, I was led to believe that I had a fetish of some kind, just because I found muscular women, super attractive, which seemed to be in contrast with, society. But as I've since come to understand, I type like I talk, rather, excuse me. Typing is hard, talking is easy. Talking is easy, typing is hard. They each have their pros and cons. So men and women are weak and pathetic, and for years I was led to believe that I had a fetish of some kind just because I found muscular women, super attractive, which seemed to be in... Oh my gosh, excuse me. That was an honest stutter on my behalf. I have those, by the way. So when I'm doing, a podcast, it's more likely for those to come out, especially as time goes on, in the podcast. But anyway, it seemed to be in contrast with society. As I've since come to understand, that's only because patriarchal society frames it as unattractive, manly, etc., literally just because men are afraid of strong women, and literally just make that shit up purely to encourage frailty and starvation culture, which is fucking disgusting. So, from one sapphic woman to any other sapphic women out there, whoever felt weird for liking buff women, you're not weird, and it's not a fetish. It's normal as fuck, and any other woman who likes women will tell you so. Men can go fuck themselves. Because it's literally y'all's fault being insecure scaredy cats about a sexy woman who could carry you across the threshold that this is even a thing. And for any other women who've ever felt self-conscious or experienced body shaming, especially any trans girls and straight girls for having a muscular build, and, straight obviously includes straight, trans, and cis women, but I wanted to specify trans women because I feel like, there's probably a few more transgender women who, are just sort of naturally muscularly built, growing up, and a lot of trans girls are straight. Excuse me. A lot of trans girls are gay. A lot of trans girls are pan. But I feel like it's really straight girls, cis and trans, who have the stigma a little bit more, right? Because in lesbian world, we just have to keep constantly reminding each other and like being like and like being like, you know, supporting each other and being like, you know, you're valid anytime that society gives us any reason to be like, oh, you're not worthy to men, right? It's like, well, you're worthy, and women who like women are not going to hold that against you the way that men do, because we don't have all that same nasty fucking framework. Okay? So but anyway, for any other women who've ever felt self-conscious or experienced body shaming, especially trans girls and straight girls, for having a muscular build, whether you come by it naturally or from hours of dedication in the gym, or who've disregarded or even self-sabotaged your own self-care like I have at times on account of being worried about being too muscular for a girl. I didn't put that part there, but I mean, I feel like no one defines a such thing as too muscular for a man unless it's just like, you know, a personal preference, but too muscular for a girl is looked at as like just like a societal, like, everyone says something about it, right? But anyway, there's no such thing. Society just raises men to be babies. And if you think it's hot, it doesn't mean you have a fetish. I don't care if you're a dude or a chick. It just means you like a woman in like a sexy way, and that's also totally normal, whether you're a dude or a chick. Because you could be a straight dude or a gay chick or like a non-binary person who likes women, or like, it doesn't matter. It's normal. So yeah, I'm just gay. And that's okay, and so are you. So this post got removed for being hate speech from Facebook, and I was banned for 24 hours from posting, all because a man saw that I used the words, so men are weak and pathetic. And there's this whole sexist double standard where men say all sorts of violent misogynist shit, using slurs, calling us bitches, sluts, whores, whatever the fuck. Openly threatening violent things, talking about violent things. It's not even just Facebook, music, whatever, wherever you go, okay? And like, no one calls that hate speech. Yet when I say, you know, just to be like, you know, kind of like, I feel like I'm trying to frame this in a way as a feminist, as a woman trying to talk to an audience, you know, of other women to validate, but also hopefully a few men looking who, when they see this, are going to be asked to, who are going to like have to ask themselves to reevaluate some things, and like ask themselves, it's like, oh my gosh, do I want to be like weak and pathetic like this? Like, because this is weak and pathetic. But like at the same time, I look at that and I'm like, when we talk like that, it's like, are we really doing anything to help toxic masculine culture? But at the same time, I'm like, and other women have agreed with me that it's like, you know, if it's empowering for me to like say it and like take back my agency over my own body, then it's just words that I'm using to point out a valid issue, that it is weak and pathetic to feel threatened or intimidated by a woman being better than you at something. I really feel like that's hate speech, because it's not about men. It's about the way that so many men are acting. Like, if you're not a misogynist, then you're not weak and pathetic. But hating women is weak and pathetic. Hating women for not being your inferior is weak and pathetic, because no woman is your inferior. There's not such thing as gendered inferiority or superiority. Feminists believe in the equality of all genders. And the reason why we have to fight so hard on women's issues is because we live in a society that creates so many issues for women and men by framing womanhood as bad and privileging masculinity and rewarding toxic masculinity. and just reinforcing it over and over and over again. Just like I know I'm reinforcing the same point over and over and over again, right? Why do we have to? Why do we have to keep doing this? It's bullshit. And we should all have outgrown it. Every generation, we try to outgrow our parents' issues, right? So let's outgrow this one, okay? And like, so it got taken down by this hate speech, but like, if you read over that, it's like, even if you feel like saying so men are weak and pathetic is a bit aggressive, even if you feel like it's more straightforward than resorting to like a slur or something. But like, I've broken down the whole issue here, right? And it's like, this post is mostly about like reaffirming for people the positivity that it's like, yeah, if you like this, it's okay. There's nothing weird. If this is you, then your body's beautiful and valid. It's I don't see this as hate speech, you know? But like, so I want to make a video talking a bit more concisely about this, and I wanted to do this today, but like, I'm sick and I can't do it the way I want to right now, and like, it's still so just like freshly irritated that I need to just rant about it and get it out. Which is like, I guess that's probably one of the reasons that my therapist told me that this would be good for me, right? And I also want to do it just because I had a fan that was like, I just want to listen to you talk. I've had several. I used to do stuff like this. Sometimes I do it while I draw, sometimes I do it while I game. But I like just this format. They said that they just want to be able to sit and listen to me rant about stuff, and my therapist told me that it's like, it'll probably be easier for you to work if you get the stuff out of your system and just like, you know, it'll be good for breaking down the issues too. There's a big thing that was always really important to me when I was talking to my therapist. It's like, I just felt useless, you know? It's like, I want to break these issues down and like really just like talk about them in a way that like, you know, isn't so rehearsed, I guess, because it's like, you want a script, right? You want to formulate, like, especially just like when you're in a debate, you want to have everything like really sort of like solid, right? But at the same time, I feel like talking about things in a more real way is just more real. Because as opposed to just like handing out a pamphlet, it's like, this is how this impacts me. And it's like, all of these constructs that impact, it never stays confined, you know, to one person's issues. That's why I look at myself, being an intersectional feminist, I look at it as like my responsibility that like I should look at every woman's shackles as being like needed to be lifted before I'm free, even if they're very different from my own. And like, I can't remember who I'm quoting because I definitely am quoting. I can't remember her name right now because I just saw this quote the other day. But I've got it on here somewhere and I want to credit her for this because, like, such a huge thing, right? That, like, we go uncredited for the things that we say, and the least of all things we can do to better it is to start, like, making sure that we credit each other. Oh my gosh, if I can find this, though. I feel like it's on Tumblr somewhere here. But I'm looking for it. I'll let you know if I come across it while I'm scrolling through here. But anyway, I that's just the way I look at it. I look at every other woman's struggle as my own. I feel like that should just be a human thing. We should just look at every other human struggle as one that we need to end before we can consider ourselves truly free, right? Because these issues, they don't just stay centered. Just like misogyny doesn't only hurt women. Like, obviously we're like on more of the receiving end of it. in like the forms of direct violence, but it creates, I just can't imagine how anything about the world that toxic masculinity and misogyny creates for men, I can't imagine how any of that could be good, even from like a perspective of a man. And maybe it's because I don't have that perspective. I mean, I get where there's like all the privileges, yeah, but like your emotions are all bottled in, you're not allowed to have them, and like I just would like always like to hope that like a man would feel some sort of remorse or guilt or something for being violent towards another human being. And it's like toxic masculinity creates violence towards women. To me, it's like if a man doesn't feel just like shaken to his core for being violent towards a woman, what the fuck is wrong? You know? And instead we live in a society of like casual rape jokes, high five, bro. You know, to put it the way Cards Against Humanity would. Oh, I feel like I'm just talking about like so many of the like typical things that feminists talk about, but I've been quiet for a long time. And it takes me being vulnerable to talk about this because it's such a thing that like, oh my gosh, I was embarrassed for so long. I thought it was weird. I thought I had a fetish, right? And not to kink shame anyone who has fetishes, you know. But like fetishizing like a group of people, right? You. I'm trans, I know what that's like, right? And like as someone who is like into being muscular, it's like I wouldn't want to like look at like my own happiness with my own physique as someone who wants that as a goal too, is to be like, you know, fetishy towards me because I hate it when people fetishize me, right? And it's like, you have to look, it's like, what is a fetish? Where does it come from? Where are the differences and things like that? I think a fetish is usually defined as a paraphilia, like an attraction is something that's not inherently sexual. I think it's most literally defined as a sexual attraction for something other than genitals, which would technically mean that everyone has a fetish for a million different things. But I feel like that's a bit broad. I feel like, to me, fetishy is like where it gets like weird, creepy, gross, anything like that. Like, you know, if like say it's not normal to like a muscular woman because it's weird, or like it's not a thing that's okay for a woman to do, or it's not a body type that is okay to find attractive, or it's inherently unattractive, right? And so this is the society I was living in, right, where it's like this thing that's like super goals for me and also super like, hey, like, you know, if I like get hit on by another woman who looks like that, it's like I ain't gonna say no, but like you know, not enough to build a relationship on, obviously, you know, so obviously they'd have to be like right for me. I feel like that's the thing that I feel like women think about that more often than guys do, like whether or not someone's really compatible for you or just like hot. I could be wrong though, because I feel like so many women, we get into such shitty relationships, right? But I feel like that's just because a lot of women are straight and date men. But anyway, um, it's like okay, well that's then so is it weird? It's like, okay, well wait, if this is manly, or it's not the okay thing for a woman, or like this somehow makes this woman's body more of a man's body even though it's a woman who owns it, so it's a woman's body, like, is it weird that I find this attractive? Do I have to be shamed for this? Is something wrong with me? Do I have to correct it? I went to psychiatrist actually about that at a point in time, and it was about the same time too that like all the constructs began falling apart for me, because I finally talked to someone about it and talked to them about all my feelings about it in a way that like even to like partners before I couldn't open up that way. And I opened up a lot about my gender at the same time too. And it was like, it was so fun to watch the therapist, because I feel like they were trying to struggle a little bit with this person is like okay, so there's a lot to unpack here, but it's like they're talking about this. It's like it's almost like it's like a woman's perspective, but it's like a person coming and identifying as male. But then it was like I started talking about my own femininity and stuff, and I guess it started to make more sense. But I didn't see that particular therapist for very long because I just sort of like I sort of like went through a lot of life changes at that point, and but it was like it was so super helpful to just like get it all off my chest and be like, I'm not gonna think I'm weird for something that's perfectly normal anymore. Right? And, oh my gosh, how freeing, right? I feel like every woman feels that way, right? It's like we're constantly having to ask what's normal, what's not normal in so many ways in our lives, right? Especially lesbians, especially trans girls. We're like, in this whole field of what's okay, what's not okay, and like, oh my gosh. So, but like to me, it's like when something gets like you know, fetishy, I feel like it's because society puts taboos and repressions on things that are normal to the point where people like get freaked out about them and like start obsessing over them, and like that can get a little bit weird, okay? But like it's like whatever. It's if it's your thing, it's your thing. You know, like I said, I don't want to kink shame because like being like super attracted to something is normal, and like if you share that in a mutually consensual relationship with someone who is your kind of weird and it's not hurting anyone, then you do you know. But like when it comes to a point that you're like just objectifying to the point where it's like you're not even talking about a human anymore. It's you're just talking about a thing, right? Just a thing, and it's like that's all you see is the thing, right? It was like, you know, I never had a complex that like got to like that level of just like seeing just a thing constantly. It's like throughout my life I've been being like, oh, this is like, why am I stuck in this role where it's like I know the me that I want to be and see, and like it's so complicated and wrapped in like societal misogynist bullshit, right? And then like also having an attraction and being like trying to grapple with that too. Wow, it was fucking complicated. And like I know I'm not the only one. And it's like, oh my gosh, it must be complex for cis women to deal with too, right? Like, you just want to, like, go to the gym and be like a chick who gets swole because hashtag girls get swole too, right? Like, that's me. And it's like, society is like, oh, but you'll scare the man, you'll intimidate the man, etc., etc., etc. I love the image on Whose Line of, like, this one time Jane Tricca, who's a professional bodybuilder and was in like films like came on there and was just like made Wayne Brady look puny, right? And Ryan Stiles just playing with his wedding ring, trying to get off, and it's like Greg Proops at the end is like, that woman could snap your head off like a praying mantis. And I'm like looking at Wayne and I'm like, he's like, he thinks this is awesome, and he's like, look at this. It's like, oh my gosh, it's like, but I feel like Wayne's kind of muscular too, so I feel like maybe he was like, this is cool. And like Ryan's like, oh, this is hot. And Greg is like this example of like, what do you say after it? That woman could snap your head off like a praying mantis. And I don't know if he was trying to make a joke or if he was being sincere, but it's like, I feel like he had this sort of reaction that like you would see of like a man trying to defend his masculinity by like saying something to put someone down, or like be like, there's a reason to be afraid of this woman or something like that. And it's like, it's so dumb. It's so dumb. A buff chick's more likely to carry you across the threshold, or probably actually want to like show off and like carry you around all day. Not all day. There's I saw a thing about this one woman who just like loves carrying people. Just like, I think it's kind of funny. It's kind of cute. But like, you know, then to want to be violent against you just because women are just more likely to be nurturing and not violent and, like, not prone to all of these, like, hostile, aggressive tendencies that men are. It's just the statistics are there, and the reasons are because we enable it, and because we encourage it, and because we say, this is how you be masculine. Violence, being the biggest, being the strongest, being the toughest, being the alpha. That's not even a real thing. Like, even among wolves and other species, alpha males are not a thing. Like, the whole thing has been debunked. And, like, the toxic masculine macho culture is, like, it's destroying so much of society. And making so much of society so much worse. And, like, just creating all these fucking issues. Like, I mean, fuck. The idea that, like, a man could like, literally make a statement telling people to be violent towards women. Like grab her by the pussy and, like, not immediately be, like, shunned out of society, much less, like, you know, become elected to an official position is, like, fucking ridiculous, for one, right? The fact that 1 in 4 women in our lives face sexual assault is, and like, other forms of sexual violence is bullshit, right? It's like society falling apart at the seams. Like, when I think about the things that worry me, it's like, it's things like toxic masculinity and misogyny. And, like, well, racism and transphobia and other things I deal with too. But, like, I spend a lot of time thinking about toxic masculinity and misogyny and the impacts that they have, because it shapes and informs my life. It shapes and informs every woman's life. It shapes and informs everyone's life, period. But for women, it shapes and informs our lives in such a just, like... I've seen women who internalize it and, like, I look at it and I'm like, how can you even? Like, when it gets to a point where it's like, of justifying it, perpetuating it, and, like, I'm like, how can you at a point? Even though it's like, I look at myself and it's like, I feel like we all look at ourselves and it's like, oh, we all came from these places where we were horrible and shitty in different ways, and then we learned better, right? There were different ways. I think everyone has different things that, like, they're better at or worse at when it comes to being a decent human being to other human beings, rather. Everyone has different things that they're better or worse at. Everyone has different things that they're better or worse at with regards to being a decent human being to other human beings. But we should learn about them, get over them, move past them. And we all internalize things against ourselves, because society drills it into our heads over and over and over again that it's correct to. Like, you know, having a message pushed constantly that cis beauty is better than trans beauty. Things like that. But so anyway, I'm so glad to get that off my chest, because, like, I laughed about it, to be honest with you. But then at the same time, I look at it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to talk about it. And that's not even what I initially planned on talking about. It just, like, it came out because I feel like I was just feeling so passionate about it. But, like, I actually wanted to talk about makeup. And I was going to do my makeup on the stream, which is why I brought it. But I may save that for, like, another time. But just briefly, like, so Sephora started this thing where they're going to be teaching transgender women how to do makeup, right? And, like, okay, there's tutorials on YouTube by cis women, there's tutorials on YouTube by trans women, there's tutorials by non-binary people, I'm sure men also, there's some great tutorials by some men too, about makeup. And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna talk about this today. I'm not gonna, like, do my makeup while I'm trying to talk about this. I'm not wearing makeup, and I was gonna do some light makeup to talk about this today. But let me talk about it without it. There's this, like, makeup is so complicated, right? I don't feel like it should be gendered. I don't feel like anything should be gendered, except for, like, people, and we should be allowed to gender ourselves, because we know what it's like to live inside our own skin, and, like, where we feel right and where we feel wrong, and where we feel like we understand people and we fit in, and people are like us, and where it's like, oh, this feels different and wrong, and like this is not me, or these are not the people I belong around socially. These are not like the people who I feel relate to my experiences as well. You know, we should be able to gender ourselves that way. But things should not be gendered. Like clothing, whoever wears it is whoever's gender it is. Eddie Izzard was like brilliant. He's a comedian. He's a dude who likes to wear dresses, right? And he doesn't identify outwardly as transgender as far as I'm aware, but like he'll talk about like I think he identifies outwardly as transvestites, or another word that starts with trans. And in Britain, I feel like that's more typically, I don't know, it feels like it's more accepted for like someone who just, you know, dresses outside of the norms and wears clothing that is usually considered to be like assigned to another gender, but like it's whoever's wears it, you know. It's different from being trans because it's not about clothing. It's not about like my discomfort with my body, even though that's been there, and even though there's a reason why my identity and my dysphoria are both there for me. And like it's weird to me because it's like I've really never met a non-binary person who didn't get that dysphoria is valid. But I met lots of like people who are trans who didn't identify as non-binary, who feel like being non-binary is just like being like cis and trying to pretend to be trans to be fashionable, and it's like, oh my gosh, what a lack of understanding of gender to be even able to frame it that way. But not everyone understands these things. Some people just understand, I feel like I'm a girl, society tells me I'm a boy, my body horrifies me. And then some people are like, oh, I feel like a girl, society tells me I'm a boy, I'm fine with my body. And the other way around. And other people who are like, well, I'm fine with my body, but like this, I don't feel like I fit in this construct of gender. That's all valid. But like, we do gender makeup in a very binary way. We make it mandatory, almost, it seems like, for women. And there's this whole complex culture of it, like, you have to understand, like, what's right for what situation, what's not, and, like, there's all these arbitrary rules, and, like, you can pick not to participate in it if you want to, but you will be punished for not participating in it. You know, like, if you don't know what makeup to wear for an interview, or you don't wear makeup at all, you know. And clothing has a similar thing, I feel, in situations like that. But, I mean, interview culture is fucked up anyway. But it goes beyond that, you know. Like, in certain situations, you're expected for your makeup to basically look a certain way. Many women break free of that. And I feel like makeup should be fun. And should, like, you know, if I want to wear whatever makeup, whenever, or no makeup, whenever, that should be my choice. I'm kind of a tomboy a lot of the times. And I don't, I don't do a lot of, like, light daytime makeup. I'm either, like, I don't have time for this bullshit today, or, like, I'm gonna make my face look like it's ready for a modeling shoot, okay? Which is more dramatic, like, nighttime style, or even just, like, photo shoot style makeup, because that's the thing, you know, there's so many layers to like how makeup is situationally supposed to be for different situations, okay? And otherwise it's like you're being countercultural. But like, and then there's certain groups of women that's like, you know, if you're trans, for example, you're expected even more to adhere to that, and if you don't, it's like, it's weird. But then it's like, if you do, it's like, are you just perpetuating the problematic parts of like makeup culture and beauty culture? And it's just, it's so fucked up. Like, I was thinking the other day about how for a while, a long time ago, there were all these YouTube tutorials, and there still are, and I've done them myself, where it's like, we focus on ways to look more cis-passing, right? Whether it's for alleviating dysphoria, whether it's for avoiding violence, whatever it is. And it's like, but all these makeup tricks that we use, aside from like things like, you know, orange foundation for concealing your beard, something like that, you know, they're all tricks and tips that's like, these are universal to women who wear makeup, because we all have this construct built for us with makeup that it's supposed to go along with the idea that we are not feminine enough as we are. We're not feminine looking enough as we are. Perfect enough as we are. We are. So we have to make ourselves more feminine. Right? And it's like, where's the arbitrary definition there? Because it's like, there's no one thing cis looks like. There's no one thing trans looks like. There's no definitive lines or barriers or like, you know, there's no one thing a woman looks like. And yet, it's like, we have this whole system here, and I feel like it's built around just this idea that cis beauty is superior to trans beauty. And if you feel that way, I'm just gonna say again, it's weak and pathetic. If you feel threatened by... It's like, if you're a cis woman, you feel threatened by a transgender woman's femininity, that's a problem. That's toxic too, you know? But anyway... We have all this shit that, like, says that our beauty is not as valid when it is. And I don't like giving into that, but, like, so we have these tutorials. We've all done them, right? I feel like the problem is, like, the way that we do them. We shouldn't be focusing on ways to pass fair because it doesn't prevent violence. And, like, I don't feel like makeup is what's gonna make you pass or not anyway. And I feel like the whole construct of passing is just, it's inherently transphobic and sexist because it relies on the idea that the solution to the problems is to blend in as opposed to making transness no longer taboo to talk about, making it no longer a subject that people are ignorant on, and like putting an end to the violence. That's the solution, not trying to pass as cis. And when it comes to dysphoria, okay, well, makeup never really did for me what HRT did. You know, you put on your makeup to feel prettier, right? Regardless of whether you're trans or not, otherwise why are you putting it on? Well, maybe because you feel obligated to, which is bullshit, but like, you live with it, right? There's just so many of these things that like we just have to live with, or we just have to like rise above them, but like, they still impact us. It's like you can only I feel like it's depressing to say. And so, you know, I'm not going to say because I don't even feel like it's true. I feel like it feels like you can only go so far with that misogyny there, right? With that hatred of women that society built into men and those like positions of power that men get put into, and those societal like strategies where it's like, you know, where men will butt in and be like, oh, this is unfair, the women are talking too much, when the women are not even talking half of the talking time, right? All that shit's there, and we could say that you can only go so far past that, you can only rise above that so much, right? I feel like it's bullshit, because yeah, you face violence, and you face retributive like action for that, right? You face retaliation for that, right? You face anything for that, but it doesn't mean that you can't just keep pushing and just keep being like, this is bullshit, and I'm not gonna deal with that. I feel like that's what we all need to do. Just all women. We need to look at those constructs and be like, okay, well, these are there, but bullshit. I'm not dealing with it. And at the same time, it's like, though, if you want to wear makeup, wear makeup. I don't care what your gender is, but it should be fun. Instead of having this complex world where it has all these rules, but like, different women's features look different anyway. A face is masculine or feminine as defined by the person who owns it, not what feature looks like what. So, if we're going to embrace that and really be body positive for everyone, we have to embrace that. We have to end this idea of trying to look more cis. Like, if you have dysphoria over your facial hair and you need to get it removed, get it removed. If you have dysphoria about anything over your body, take care of it. That's valid. That's not trying to be more cis. That's a legitimate need. You know, if your facial hair bothers you that much and you can't afford to get rid of it, put orange foundation over it. But like, I feel like it's just ingenuine. Even though I've been there, I've made these videos, which is why I want to remake my makeup tutorials without this negativity there, because it is negativity, and it was self-imposed too at the time. Like, wow. But it sells well, doesn't it? Doesn't it really? this idea of like, oh, I can use this makeup trick that's like super awesome that I got from wherever. And it's like, for me, it's like, I looked at it as like, it seemed very, it's all like, yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, this is trans-specific. Like, look, you can like figure out, it's like, oh, well, if your cheeks aren't as full because of your hormones, because yeah, estrogen fills out your cheeks and changes your facial fat. You can highlight it like this. You can highlight these features to bring out your femininity. And then it's like, you look back and you realize, oh wait, these are the same tricks that like all women use, because we all have society telling us we're not good enough. It's bullshit. So makeup is complicated, and that's mainly what I wanted to say about makeup today. So now that I've gotten that off my chest, I like how it just feels like extended rant about things that grind my gears live on YouTube, but it works. I feel like the format will get a little bit more formal as we go, and maybe I'll have a desk at some point because I miss it. Like having a desk, even though I've never used one in that format. But not having a desk, I miss one for the ability to use one in that format. So, let's go over what we have here as far as chat, because I've been ignoring it and I'm so sorry. I'm gonna get better at that. Excuse me. That is such just like, oh, I hate that. I hate being sick right now. But like, oh, that's another thing. It's like you're more allowed to have those like gross body things, like you know, having a cough or hack or like burp or something. If you're a dude, it's like as soon as you're a chick, it's like it's not okay, right? Also bullshit. It's like when you're a transgender woman and you know you own yourself. People just, it's like they try to use it to be like, oh well, then what are you adhering to? And it's like nothing. I just am a woman. And that's as simple as it should be for everyone, no matter what their gender is. No one should have to like, there shouldn't be like a gold standard of like, you must meet this requirement, this requirement, this requirement, this requirement to ride the ride. We know what it feels like. You know? It's been scientifically established that people relate to a gender usually by about the age of 3, and it's pretty sad. You know, we've been looking at studies of the human brain that show all of these like spectrum of ways in which people's brains vary across gender. And I think it's pretty cool, because I feel like it means that we all sort of have our own unique ways to think and process the world and the universe around us and our own lives, and like what we see ourselves as, how we see ourselves, how we relate to each other. I think it's really cool. I think like all the ways that we gender are really, really cool. Like, to me, I don't understand what it's like to be a man, and like I hate dealing with toxic masculinity, but like I don't hate men just for being men. Like, you know, I hate it when men are misogynist douchebags or violent. And so many transgender men who were assigned female at birth, I guess they've seen more of that world of misogyny and been on the receiving end of it, you know, than like a cis man. And so maybe that's why it seems like less trans men are as misogynist. But I mean, some are. Some trans men are incredibly misogynist. They're the most misogynist people on earth. And it's like, I don't get it. I really don't get it at that point. Like, it's never okay. But at least I can, like, understand where a cis man can get off on it from a lack of perspective and from, like, just wanting all the privileges and benefits, right? Or just from ignorance. Like, if you raise a man not to think of women as people or equals, it's like, what do you expect? Just because we stand up and say we're people, we're equals, they're gonna sit down and shut up and be like, okay. Not when you've taught them their whole lives that we're not. You know? But we can still overcome it. We will. We just all have to keep being bold and actually, like, not putting up with it. And, like, it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating to, like, to post something and then have it, like, you know, just because, like, some dude got, like, his feelings hurt over it. It's like, oh no Facebook for 24 hours, because it's like, if I needed something, my phone's out of service right now. I wouldn't be able to message my partners about it. If I think my primary is home, but you know, like if they weren't, I wouldn't be able to message them about it aside from Facebook. I can't post or run my page. All because some man got his feelings hurt because he's insecure about buff ladies. It's ridiculous. And it could have been any number of things, any number of topics where it's like men suddenly turn into babies where women are involved. Oh, those could go on and on and on and on and on, right? But like, it seems like a lot of trans men are a little bit better at just not being misogynist douchebags, but like, you know, it's the behavior and the societal things that need to stop, and it's possible for men to not embody those things. We just have to, we're working against all of the everything that's been ingrained to like break through to like truth and equality and all that shit that America's supposed to be about. I feel like the world should be about all that stuff, and I feel like America is not as about it in practice as we preach, but I mean, everyone knows that, right? So we need to change it. So many things we need to change, oh my gosh. Yeah, I know. It gets wearying. It gets so wearying. Usually when it's like you look at the world and you're like, oh, I have a voice. I can change the world. I can speak up, right? I can stand up and say no more. And you become an activist. And someone asked me once how to be an activist, and that's really it. You stand up and you say no more. And you keep doing it. And you keep not letting people get in your way. And like I feel like every now and then, really we have to be subversive about it, don't we? I feel like so many women know this. It's like we all know this, like we're all used to being subversive, right? It's a communicative style. It's one of the things that got brought up in this sociology class I was talking about back at the beginning of this video when I was in college, where I had to do this whole lesson, right? So after the lesson, everyone in the class, it was all these like southern cis straight people. I mean, sure there were a few queer people pegged in there here and there, right? I didn't know what to make of me when I came to class, dressing and presenting as myself, because I was trying to do that in some situations more often than not, and I was pretty consistent about it. A lot of it had to do with, like, you know, the day of the week. But, like, when I was going to that class, I was dressing and presenting as myself. But I framed my identity a little bit differently because I still carried a lot of internalized transphobia. And I was struggling with figuring out what to do with myself because the social transition was starting to seem more appropriate for me. But, like, I didn't know so many things about medical transitions. I bought into all the myths and the rumors about, like, any number of things. Like, what they say, you get a sex change, they turn your dick hole they turn your dick inside out, rather. Not your dick hole. Your dick inside out, but, like, that's not what a GRS is like at all. And I didn't decide that I wanted to medically transition until I learned that hormone replacement therapy was a thing, and, like, actually saw results of vaginoplasties, and, like, learn more about all the changes hormones put your body through, and how all of her genitals are made of the same parts, just arranged and sized and shaped differently anyway. And then I was like, okay, wow, I felt my whole life like the only way I could ever truly be happy is if I could just, like, somehow die and maintain my consciousness and be reborn as a cis woman, right? That was how I felt most of my life. And it's not true. But until I learned all of that, I was like, I didn't know what to do because, like, I thought I would just be in this sort of weird place where no one would ever accept me, um, because of my body. And it's like, well, being trans feels like that anyway, even if you do transition sometimes. That's one of the shitty things, is that, like, you know, society doesn't start treating you differently just because you have a vaginoplasty, but at least you feel better about your body, right? Society, you know, I feel like society treats you. I feel like it's a weird place to be. Because on an individual level, people sort of. I feel like gender is something that we have, like, a sense for in some ways. That, like, we sort of are like. It's how we gender ourselves and how we figure out, like, where we go, you know, is by being able to sort of identify behaviors or patterns and sort of associate them to how we associate ourselves to the world and those constructs that we have and the framework that we have in whatever society that we're in. Like, in Native American society, 5 to 6 genders depending on the tribe. In a white gender binary, 2 genders. In, you know, other cultures, even white cultures that were, like, pagan and stuff like that, through other points in time, you know, different amounts of varying genders. It's just all different, you know, like, in Native American societies, a lot of times where there were all these genders, it's like each gender has its own name. They weren't even thought of in terms of a world where there was just man and woman. They were thought of in terms of a world that was so much more expansive than that and didn't define itself in a binary way like that. So it's almost as though it's not really equivalent, you know. But however you construct your gender, it's valid because you're constructing it the way that you fit in with other people. You're constructing it the way that you feel with regards to your own identity and who you see yourself as. Like, me seeing myself growing up, like, do I want to be Ozzy or Britney Spears? And it's like, Britney Spears, you know. Do I want to hang out with the guys or with the girls? Well, the guys are gross and grody and bullying and violent and, like, weird and I don't get them. And then I had, like, the other girls where it was like, oh, this is better. Like, this is. I feel like in school especially, I was like, this is not full of all the distractions and unnecessary, like, just grodiness at inappropriate times and, like, immaturity. And, I guess I was really focused on learning as a kid. And I guess a lot of girls are and don't get to. There's studies on this because of boys being disruptive. Like, you remember when we would say boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, right? Excuse me. Anytime that happened, it was punishment, right? Usually for the boys acting out, right? So what's the strategy? It's like use girls as buffer zones because of not being disruptive as much. It's bullshit. Something else I was reading up on today, but it's very, very, very relevant to my experiences in elementary school and just all throughout schooling, really. But, you know, I felt like I belong there more. My dysphoria has always been a thing, but I don't feel like my dysphoria is necessary for my gender to be valid. I don't feel like having my gender necessarily comes with the dysphoria. I just feel like the way that my brain is wired, it doesn't like my body. It's just like, it feels wrong inside of it. Like, self-love even has been difficult most of my life, right? And self-love is important to, like, all women. All people, really. Right? It's just, like, there are taboos around talking about it, especially, like, for women. But, especially for transgender women. But, like, But, like, people, I feel like it's like with dysphoria, though, people think so much about just your genitals, and it's like, how do you describe this? Like, so many things about your whole body that you have to overcome, and, like, eventually, of course, I found ways to move past all that, but for, like, so much of my life, and so much of so many trans people's lives who experience dysphoria, you have this excuse me, this whole, like, complicated dilemma of, like, something that's totally normal and healthy for your own sexual and emotional health, and being revolted by your body and everything about the way it feels and functions, right? Like, okay, some things about sexual stuff always feels good-ish, right? Sensation-wise, unless you are asexual maybe, or just, like, averted to sexual stuff, but, like, for most people, and that's normal and valid too, but for most people, it's like, self-love is one of those things that's, like, it's a normal thing. It's one of those things everyone does that no one wants to talk about, and no one wants to, like, admit to it, or, like, excuse me, parents are like, I don't want my kids doing this when they're like growing up and, like, going through those phases of our lives where it's like it's normal for us to start doing those things. And it makes you laugh a lot of times, to think about, there's this joke that my dad used to tell where he'd be like, what happened to all the women's penises? It's, first of all, I mean, problematic joke. It's a sexist joke, but the punchline, of course, is, oh, they played with them too much and they all fell off. And, like, I feel like if my parents had, like, if I had to ask when I was 3, I was like, what happened to mom's penis, right? When I noticed it was like, well, why isn't there one? I thought all people had to have this to pee, right? And like, I felt so uncomfortable with mine. And it's like, if he had told that joke as his answer back then, it's like I would have started playing with mine and never stopped until it fell off. And I feel like that probably would have been disturbing and not a good path for my life. But, like, that'd be weird. That'd be really weird, right? But, like, oh gosh, it's like, and then you have the construct that society builds for you where it's like, me even talking about this is like, oh, it's so taboo. It's like, oh, how can you go there? And then you have these whole constructs where it's like, it's okay for men to be sexual, right? And to talk about men's sexuality and stuff like that. It's not okay for women to be sexual and for us to talk about our sexuality and own it in the same way that men do in our society, and we should be able to. But, one more reason we need feminism, right? And, like, for when you have being trans on top of it, there's this whole construct of, like, people look at transness and queerness in general, and, like, being trans and being gay are two such different things. It's like, you can be trans and gay, or trans and not gay. Because one is about who you are, one is about who you love. And, like, though people, it sort of gets put all together, and, like, the hatred for it is, like, based on this idea that it's like that all these things are, like, either sexual perversions or, like, sexual deviancy or, like, something like that. And so it's like, to be trans and, like, talk about topics that, I feel like as like, cis women as feminists have for a long time had a handle on, oh, we're just gonna we'll see how many times we can say vagina in one video. We'll be bold and unapologetic about lesbian relationships. We'll be bold and unapologetic about women's bodies and sexual function and pleasure. I would say that, like, society isn't there, but feminists are. And we're doing it, we're talking about it, but it's like, I feel like transgender feminists still feel a lot of times it's like, oh gosh, how do we talk about these things when we live in a society that's just gonna be like, they already make our lives all about sex, right? And it's like, well, first off, sex is natural and good and wholesome, and it's like, as long as it's like, it should be safe and consensual and fun. That's what it should be. But, like, We live in a society that doesn't teach about consent or safety. We teach about abstinence and, like, male sexual function and, like, health. And we don't teach about women's sexual function and health. We ignore intersex people. We ignore trans people. Trans men are left out of the whole, like, we teach about men's sexual health and pleasure and function, even. But, like, women's is taboo. You know? And it goes so much further worse than that. You know, I could talk about how, Viagra is like a thing and, like, birth control is debated and how fucking sexist that is, but I feel like that should be established by now. Even if it's not, it should be, you know? But so you're trans and you want to talk about things that are, like, totally normal and valid, and it's like, we need sex ed too. We deserve to be taken into account too. And, well, all women do. This is one of the biggest problems. I get so pissed off about sex ed. I have to do a whole video about it, but because it's just, like, it's such bullshit. But so it's like, we have to talk about these things, right? Because we're the only ones, and I think we're just now all starting to get to that point where it's like, okay, well, let's be bold, let's talk about this shit. Let's not shy away from it just because, like, people are going to be gross about it, because if it's like, I feel like if people are being gross about it, it's because they're fetishizing us for being trans. Just like women are fetishized for anything, right? I feel like we're fetishized for just being women. Like, if I pick up a guitar, ooh, baby. That's someone's kink, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with finding that attractive and sexy. Plenty of women who love women do, but, like, when it turns into this whole thing that, like, my identity is just as a sexual object, I didn't ask for that. No woman did. Like, if we should be able and allowed to be sexual when we choose to be, and then we're called sluts and shamed for it and whores and shamed for it. But, like, we should be able to own our bodies and our sexuality. And we should, we should not be looked at as, like, just such fucking sexual objects. We should be the ones to decide when it is not okay for us to be sexualized. Our skin, even our nude bodies. Because men get that agency. How is it fair for anyone else not to? But, excuse me, but instead, the way that society is right now, it lets men decide that for us, and, like, takes away agency of our bodies, and even allows us to be subject to violence, and it's just excused, written off, ignored. I get so pissed about these things every day. Every fucking day. And, like, it makes me wonder why it took me this long to start the idea of doing a podcast. And, like, this will probably be the longest episode ever. Because I've had so much on my chest today that I've been thinking about. And, like, I've had so many other videos that I want to make talking about stuff. That I'll have to get to, another point on another day. But, like, it's been making it difficult for me to video. It really has. Because it's such a huge load of several different backpacks that I've just been being quiet about for so long and just, like, bitching on Tumblr about for so long. But, someone likes to listen to me rant and bitch about this stuff on YouTube, and that's affirming, and it provides an extra thing for my Deely-Boppers, and like I said, they're like my family, me, I love them, they're wonderful. Excuse me, but anyway, so when I was in this class in college where I did this lesson, I was like dressing femininely, coming into the class. They didn't know what to make of me at the time, and I framed it in very neutral and vague ways, and by the end of the course it was so cool because, like, I explained all of these, like, gendered communication studies, and we went through all these exercises with them and class discussions on them, and, like, brought up things like, like, you know, where women, a lot of times, we don't get as much say in conversations, and we feel like we have to keep trucking along so as not to be silenced. And, like, you know, men will take credit for our ideas and get the credit for them when we had them first. And, like literally in the same room, right? And like, by the time we were done with it, it's like everyone in the class, they felt like they had a much better understanding of communicating with the other gender. And I thought it was cool because it was like, you know, I feel like we almost focus more on, like, the way that women communicate, and, like, I guess that's because, like, men act like our world is a mystery, and maybe it is to them, but, like, it doesn't have to be. I'm not sure if I want to understand their world at all, but, like, that's just because it just seems like this sea of toxic masculinity. It seemed like when I was a little kid that male friendships basically amounted to bullying, and as an adult, it still does. I don't know why I'd want to understand that, but maybe I'm just not understanding it. I don't know. Anyway, so we, you know, we built up all these things, and they just get so frustrating. So fucking frustrating. And so, I don't know how hearing me bitch about them, especially with a horrible fucking whatever it is my partner got, I'm pretty sure it's the plague. If that makes you happy, then it makes me happy, but I'm gonna keep doing it because I feel like one of my biggest things when I want to talk about an issue is that it's like they get so complex for me just because of how much all of the struggles I deal with just, like, tie into each other. I feel like any woman could say that. I feel like any person in any marginalized group could say that. That it's just, it gets so complex. It gets so difficult to talk about, right? Excuse me. But I was just looking at the chat, but because I did say I was gonna check on that a moment ago. But so they all in this class, they all were like thanking me at the end of the class, like telling me that their relationships at home were better even and shit like that. I guess we frame masculinity as sort of like the status quo, and femininity as being like, oh, we're the weird and crazy ones, sure, whatever. But you know, like, we talked about other things, how, like, we talked about how male communication is different from female gendered communication, in like ways that focus on like specific things that are sort of like, you know, almost, it seems like guy world things. But, like, for the most part, it seemed like most of the differences were focused on, like, women's communication styles as being, like, sort of the mystery. Oh, excuse me. I feel like just so, like, I need to take some medicine or something. But anyway, it was so cool to me that, like, still we, you know, as a class, we all sort of, like, actually learned something. I feel like the men had the most to learn, and the impressive thing to me was that, like, they did. Especially in the South, like, from someone like me talking, but that's the cool thing. Maybe it was because it was a college. Maybe it was a slightly more liberal environment, but, like, for the most part, people just wanted to know more about me. And, like, at the end of it, they wanted to know how to gender me. Which was cool. Because nowadays, it's like, I think about having to make, like, a video, on, like, why you should ask people their pronouns, or, like, how you can never tell someone's gender from their appearance, or assume it from their appearance, right? And back then, it was like, oh my gosh, all I did was, like, basically school a room on, like, gender and communications after they didn't know what to make of me, and then they're like, huh, well, like, you get all of this, so, like, what are you? Not a very good way to ask it, kind of sexist, kind of transphobic, but mostly ignorant, I guess. But, like, they were like, well, some of them, like, it became a fresher conversation at a point. I remember in the room, a few people were like, well, but, like, so you identify as a girl on the inside, right? And I'm like, well, yeah. And they're like, so why don't you just, like, live your life like that all the time on the outside and stuff? And it's hard. Like, once you make that step, you can't go back. Why would you want to? First off, you're living your truth. It's hard because people are shitty and transphobic. But you're living your truth, so it's still better anyway. 100%. We'll always, always, always agree that it's better. Even at the roughest, the worst things have been, on the inside, I feel like I know myself better. I feel like I am more at peace and at one with myself. So, the slings and arrows can do so much. The actual literal violence can do so much, you know. I feel like I say that, it's like, oh sure, well, you know, trans women are murdered for being trans, you know, every year. But as long as you're here, the violence can do so much. But, excuse me, going back to a life of inauthenticity can hurt so much. Like, it can't only hurt so much, it hurts on an inside level that nothing on the outside could ever fix. Like, to me, you could offer me, like, $1 million to detransition and never go back. And I wouldn't take it. Like, I would still be me. And I feel like so many trans people would say the same thing. And I feel like that's the point. Is that there's something about internal wholeness that nothing about the outside world can shatter. There's something about internal rightness with oneself that nothing about the outside world can shatter. Like, you know you're right with your higher power, you know, if you have one. You know that you're right with the life that you want to live, if you're the YOLO mindset, right? You know, I'm a reincarnationist, so whatever, but it's still important, right? Like, I still believe that it's like, you've got this life to be you. So be you. And I think back, and it's like, I almost wish at the time... Oh no, OBS disconnected and reconnected. I don't know where that happened. But, like, okay, so during that point in my life, it was like, I was sort of, it's like, I ended up outside of that relationship after a point, but it's like, that made me not want to transition because, like, I didn't want to be sexualized for my transness. It didn't necessarily make me not want to transition, and this was before I knew about DeXaeris and HRT. It made me feel so self-conscious about just even presenting authentically that like I shut down even doing that. How about I put it that way, because that's more accurate. Um it was like, she wanted me to wear my clothing for like when I would go out to drag nights, which was my night to be me out of the week, or like when I would go to my education classes, or like my whatever classes I had before drag that week. Which is really bio drag to me, because I was a girl being a girl, and like when I went there, the first time I was there, they thought I was a cis girl doing bio drag, like doing cis girl stuff, but whatever. It was one of the funnest nights of my life too. First night at Queer Bar, just lesbians hitting on me all night long, and like, oh my gosh, it was just so wonderful, and like, it was funny to me that they thought I was a cis girl at first, because I do have a lot of features that people just like look at as like really feminine. Um, it's just like I said earlier with like, my own intersexness is just the way I was made. That I've got like some feminine traits that people look at and are like, oh, that's distinctly feminine, and like, it's weird because people, so they look at you, and it's like, I feel like we have a general sense of gender where we can be like, after a while of getting to know someone, be like, oh, I get it now, because that's been the way it's been like for interacting with other people for long periods of time, like getting to know people, forming solid relationships and friendships with people, working with people. That's the way it's always been. Like, my one friend who I came out to preempted me, in high school. And so there's something there a little bit. It's like, okay, it's my place to gender myself, but my point is I had to look at her and be like, well, you're not wrong, but you're the first person who's ever made me feel beautiful or valid for this, or like, not weird for feeling like I'm a girl. And like, places where I've been, even like I worked for Regent's Bank for a while after I came out at a contact center, and I ended up leaving because like they were trans affirming in their policies, but like in action it never stopped harassment from coworkers, even with like other coworkers who thought that I was doing the bullshit I didn't deserve, like fighting to get some people off my back. It didn't stop, and I finally decided to leave. When a bunch of things were going on in my life, but like, they threw a day where one of the teams for like a spirit activity was like, they were all dressing up in like faux, Indian attire, and I'm native, so that didn't sit well with me. And I was going through a lot of like depression in my life over like, finding out that the insurance wasn't going to cover my procedures that I needed, like my HRT and stuff. And it's like, now I live in a state where the state covers it, but point is, I was working for Regent's Bank, and all these people like got to know me, and like, I just sort of fell in, just like I do everywhere. But it's like, it gets so tiring when you go out publicly, like trying to meet people and be in places. I feel like that's why queer spaces are so important, because there we sort of all understand each other to an extent, right? I mean, there's transphobic gay people who are cis, who, for whatever reason or another, I've seen it go any number of different ways. I've seen the whole like, why don't you just be gay, thinking it's an orientation as opposed to realizing it's about gender, and that I don't understand, because it's like, you would think that gay people have had like people mistake their orientation for being gender thing enough times that they would not want to like reverse that thing. But for the most part, we understand each other, whereas in like non-queer spaces, safe spaces, which is most of society, I feel like I'm lucky that now I live in a state and a city where there are a lot of queer people. But in most places, it's like, queer safe spaces have to be designated. You have to put up a sign to be like, hey, we value LGBT people, right? For us to know that we're safe. And you have to have clubs and bars that are like, you're a guest of the gay community to like all the straight cis people, and like, we'll throw you out if you misbehave. In order to have queer safe spaces. And it's like, I feel like that's one of the reasons that it is so essential. is just simply that. Excuse me. But like, even with those spaces, you know, it's like we have to make society a safe space to be. We have to make society to be a safe space to be queer. We have to make society a safe space to be black. We have to make society a safe space to be a woman. We have to make society a safe space to be Native, Asian, Islamic, Middle Eastern, you know, Latino. We have to make society a safe space to be autistic or neurodiverse. We have to make society a safe space for all these things. It gets so tiring, right? Trying to get people to stop being shitty, it gets tiring, right? And it's just, you know, it feels better talking about it and getting it out. And when you do that online and people could just like go and shut you down by being like, oh, well, I don't like having to acknowledge this. It makes my feelings hurt as a man. And so, or it makes my feelings hurt as a white person if it's not an issue of race, or it makes my feelings hurt as a straight person or whatever. That's not a safe space. Like, I feel like, okay, saying that Facebook is not a safe space for women and that it's misogynist and it's transphobic is nothing new. Nothing new. But, like, when are we gonna start doing something about it? I like the idea of building alternatives, and some people are on that. I like the idea of alternative solutions to things, but I feel like I like even better the idea of accountability. And making people accountable. And making websites accountable. And making systems and societies accountable for treating all human beings like human beings. That way, you know, transness wouldn't be looked at as something to fetishize. And I feel like I don't know what it is. Like, cis people fetishize transness. To y'all, it's like, you're like, oh, it's my kink, it's the best of both worlds. And it's like, that's such bullshit. Like, and then it's like trans people receive like the blame of being fetishized. It's like, oh, it's our fault because it's like, I don't get it, because it's like, it's cis people that make our lives all about sex. For us, it's like being comfortable and okay in our own bodies. And you know, there's nothing fucking wrong with sex. It's beautiful, it's natural, it should be ideally consensual and safe and fun for everyone who's involved with it. And it shouldn't be something society has so many fucking taboos over. But like, and it's weird because I feel like a sexually repressed society and a misogynist society go hand in hand. I feel like it just seems like being a woman-hating society and a society which is uptight about sex, they just go hand in hand. Like, what is it about it? It's so weird. Birds do it, bees do it, even trees technically do it a totally different way that gets like pollen all over everything, which is kind of gross if you think about it, but whatever. Not gonna be body positive for the trees, it's not gross. But like, you know, I feel like there's this whole thing where it's like men are allowed to have pleasure with sex and like women are not. Procreation is like a woman's only reason to be able or allowed to have sex, and for like men it's not. And it's like, if you're a man and you're having sex and it's not with a woman, that's not okay. If you're a woman and you're having sex and it's not with a man, that's not okay. And it's like, what the fuck is it your business? If you say that it's the business of whoever's doing it, then let it be the business of whoever's doing it. But like, I feel like it's like, it doesn't even go to that, because of the fact that like, you know, cis straight people are always like, oh, you keep shoving gayness in our faces, and it's like, well, look at the media, and like, look at the way that straightness is shoved in the faces of people who are queer. Like, there's sex scenes and makeout scenes and like everything, and it's like always straight shit, and it's like this isn't even the argument, even though like it should be okay in like you know, any TV series where you would have like a couple in bed that's straight, you should be able to have a couple in bed that's gay. Any TV series where you'd have a couple making out that's straight, you should be able to have a couple making out that's gay. No one would talk about it. Any movie, once again, same thing, and no one would talk about it. It's like, wow, that would be wonderful, because I don't feel like we really have society bitching very much about straight relationships in film media anymore. It used to be people who bitch about just sex in general, but I feel like we've progressed past that. Like, you know, you have couples in the same bed as opposed to sharing beds on opposite sides of the room, all like Bert and Ernie style. And like, it's weird because like that used to be a thing people complained about, even though it was a straight thing. It was just like society was so fucking sex repressed, and like, let's not keep going in that direction, because like when it gets to the point where sex ed is impacted and we're not learning and knowing things that we need to about our own bodies and sexual function and pleasure for women, because that's not touched on, even though it's definitely for men, and like function and health and important things like that, it's all equally important for everyone, you know, not just like one or two people. And I wish that having classes like I had, working towards being an education major, about like where you delve into things about like socializing and the way that like gender affects the way that we communicate with each other, and the way that we socialize with one another and the way that we interact with one another. I feel like that should be required in high school too, and it should touch on trans and non-binary identities too. Like it should be required for there to be some kind of course to be like, okay, so we've learned this about genders and sexes, and like we've learned this, and like this is what you need to know for your sexual health and pleasure and function and stuff like that for your life. Like, in, you know, there you go. And we should be able to have a class that's like, so this is how studies have shown that like different genders communicate and relate and things like that, and this could be a helpful handy guide for if you ever feel lost among the sea of like, you know, issues that can arise in that, like, you know, a relationship between two straight people not functioning anymore, or like, you know, a trans person feeling you know, confused about where to fit in society. It's like there's this thing where you know, cis people do frame trans cis a little bit backwards sometimes, I guess, trying to understand it, where it's like they frame this idea of like a boy trying to be a girl or a girl trying to be a boy, and it's like you get people who are quote unquote accepting, tolerant, whatever, but it's like they still end up mistreating you, and like even sometimes subjecting you to social violence, or like just being weirded out by you, and like things like that, and you end up being alienated because it's like they look at you and it's like they see someone and they keep trying to read the exterior and the sex of a person and like assign it with the gender binary, even though we know that's broken, and be like, okay, so this person's trying, right? And then like, but then they see that person behaving as another person of their gender, and they're like weirded out by it, like, well, whoa, why are you? It's like, it seems so weird, and it seems mostly to be, I don't know, I can't speak on the perspectives of a trans man, but like as a transgender woman, it seems like there's definitely that slant there, that extra little bit of trans misogyny that's like, it's like, oh, you mean it, and it's like before you come out, and everyone would agree with you anyway, and then it's like afterwards, it's like all of a sudden, oh no, not like that, and it's like, oh, bullshit. First of all, this has nothing to do with you calling what you saw correctly in the first place. This is me, and I'm just finally like bold enough to actually be brave enough to not hide from it. And like second, it's like why would you be weirded out by a person acting of their gender? It's like they try to treat them still like they're a member of the gender they were assigned at birth, and like get weirded out when it's like that doesn't quite work out, or we get frustrated, or like things don't proceed in a social context the way that they expect it to, or like we get pissed off, or like whatever, because you can tell. You can tell when someone is misgendering you in their behavior, even if they're gendering you properly with their mouth words. You can tell. It hurts. It sucks. And it makes social interaction a chore. It makes it impossible. It means you have to constantly educate people, constantly rolling your eyes, constantly giving up, constantly going home, constantly feeling like you wasted your time trying to build a relationship with someone, and walking away just being like, okay, so they just see me as a person trying to be something, as opposed to a person who is something. And it's even worse because it's and they keep treating me in a way that tries to shove me back into that place, and is not appropriate and not affirming and not, it's not my social world, and so you just leave it. It's so easy to become a recluse for that, but I feel like that's one of the most harmful things that we could do, would be to recluse like that. I mean, there are days when I just want to sit behind a desk and bitch and sit in the studio and make music, but I have dreams, and I'm going to make them happen. And everyone should have that opportunity. But for me, for so long, whether it was being happy with my body in any number of ways, being happy with my career path in any number of different ways, pursuing the hobbies and loves that I want to pursue in a number of different ways, growing up in this really fucked up split world that has all of these, that first off has transphobia and sexism as institutionalized things, and misogyny as an institutionalized thing, and has all these gender roles on top of it, that there's all these levels of liberation to fight through. And women, we should all be fighting through them together, without regard to race, without regard to whether we're trans or cis. But, actually with regard to those things, because we should be uplifting those struggles that are a little bit tougher. Those race struggles that some women have, they're unique to women in those cultures. Those struggles women have, they're unique to being trans, being a lesbian, being pan, being poly, whatever they are. Being disabled, neurodiverse, whatever. Feminism just needs to be, we need to push for all women, and we need to push for the equality of non-binary people too, and for toxic masculinity to stop creating environments where men's issues are just we look at men and be like, oh, well, you're supposed to be bigger and stronger. Just bullshit. Because being big has nothing to do with being a man or a woman. Being strong has nothing to do with being a man or a woman. Although I feel I could say that maybe being strong is just it's an equally noble thing to aspire to as a man or a woman or a person of any gender. But it's not gendered. And it's really weird to look at men who who face legitimate issues and be like, oh, well, you need to man up. And it's with what that means right now, no. How about, you should talk about it? How about you should, express your feelings without being violent? How about, you should be vulnerable. What a twist, right? You should be vulnerable, right? What a twist. What a fucking M. Night Shyamalan plot twist. But I feel like it's true. I feel like if you're a man who's dealt with the violence that is ignored because we have a society that says, oh, men are bigger and stronger and can't be subject to violence, right? Men always want it and can't be raped, right? That's bullshit. It's all bullshit. Or even women are perfect fucking angels and incapable of wrongdoing. No woman on the planet believes that. Okay? It's not a feminist principle. It's a feminist principle that it is not okay for one gender to be privileged and entitled over another And, like, that it's also not okay to, like, feed into a construct that encourages toxicity. But, like, so you know, I feel like when men, you know, have their issues, that we as feminists, like, we're like, this is a feminist issue. Like, sexual violence happens to men, too. Domestic violence happens to men, too. I feel like the problem is, like, MRAs say it just to shut us up about, like, our legit issues, or to, like, tell us that our issues aren't bad because we're not the only ones who deal with them, even though we deal with them in, like, super ridiculously, largely, disproportionately higher degrees. Which is sort of the thing to take into account. Is, like, you know, just be vulnerable. Like, if you're one of those men, tell your story. Like, you know, like, tear down a society that says that men are always bigger and stronger, and have to always be bigger and stronger, and always have to be tougher and more macho and more capable, and all these things. Tear down a society that says that men have to be superior in order to not feel inferior, because that's what's weak and pathetic. The fact that you have to feel superior to someone in order to not feel inferior to some ridiculous standard, or like, you know, like your gender is invalidated. It's bullshit. And it shouldn't lead to someone getting their feelings so hurt over a post being like, yay, buff ladies, that they end up reporting it and mildly inconveniencing me. But still, it's like, what pisses me off is all the structure behind it. So I feel as though I've pretty much wrapped everything up. When someone said something was a spoopy and a bold moment for something to happen. I'm good at that. I'm just gonna look through the chat here real quick. Kurisu Oka is one of my super Deely-Boppers on Patreon.com. Always shows up for everything I do, so thank you so much for being here. Beverly agrees that she feels like violence is something that men are encouraged to feel more entitled to, which is why we see examples of violent toxic masculinity. I like the way that Beverly put that, because yeah, you're right. It's not the natural male condition. We just encourage it more and give it more excuses. You know, it's the way it is. Let's see here. And I could say, you know, I'm gonna say that I feel like testosterone plays a role, because, like, I know that when it's like, I've had times in my life, obviously before hormone therapy and after hormone therapy, where testosterone made my brain a place of, like, rage and anger and uncontrollable, just, like, fury with, like, the littlest things. But, like, I always took it out on myself, and that's not cool either. But, like, I feel like at the same time, that's because I'm sitting here with a brain that's not meant for it. And, like, for me, even having because my levels of testosterone were always low with what is expected for someone assigned male at birth. But even, like, that low level, it's just, like, enough to, like, make your brain a storm of, like, error. So maybe the hormone, I don't know, maybe there's something about the hormone that like, triggers aggression. I mean, obviously, like, you know, people who get aggressive, like, roiding with, like, extra T are I feel like that's proof of that. But I don't feel like for someone who's, like, you know, if someone is meant to have testosterone in them, I don't feel like just that is like an excuse for the violence, especially when it's like, you know, a woman like me whose brain is not necessarily as cut out for it can still, you know, take those tendencies and, like, control them to not direct them outward. Every man should be able to do that. And, like, I've known other women who have had high testosterone for someone assigned female at birth who experience aggressive and violent tendencies on account of it. But it still seems as though in those cases it's like the violence was always more verbal. It was always more channeling rage in a misdirected manner, I guess. It never got physical, you know. And that's, you know, I'm not saying that, like, verbal violence is not okay. Emotional abuse is not okay. It's just as real and needs to be taken just as seriously and validly as physical abuse. But, you know, I don't feel as though testosterone is an excuse. I feel like it's so much of how we program men. And if we were going to make it an excuse, even though we know that too much in anyone can trigger aggressive tendencies, it's like, even if we're, like, we have to acknowledge that once we see that evidence, but at the same time, we have to look at the fact that, well, not all men are violent, right? You can't make the argument and then not, like, actually take the steps to get there. You can't be like, well, not all men are like this, so the ones who aren't a problem. They are. Once again, something I could say on Facebook that, like, if someone got their feelings hurt, they could be like, oh, hate speech, you just said that men are a problem. And it's like, no, I just said men who embrace toxic masculinity and misogyny are a problem. Are you disagreeing with me? Because if you don't feel like men who embrace toxic masculinity and misogyny are a problem, that makes you part of the problem. I want to see what Krisu said, because I feel like she's been, like... Thank you for the get well soon, please. I'm so sorry. I wish I had been looking at this, but I was so just what I want. I was just so on what I was talking about. Let's see. Krisu says, if I'm into having a toned and or buff figure, it's not manly, it's mealy. I like that. I would say it's womanly. Like, I would say like, you know, if you're gonna, what's the whole thing where it's like, you know, my dad would make fun of me when I was in high school and I got my first weight bench when I wanted to start to work out. He'd be like, oh, you're going to be a manly man. And, like, oh my god, that pushed me so far away from exercise. But, like, I feel like, oh, you're going to be a womanly woman. It's like, sure, yeah, let things that a person enjoys be, like, affirming for them for whatever reason, you know? But I like that. It's not manly, it's mealy, and I feel like it's like, you know, if it's a woman doing it, it's womanly. Quoting Josh Peck. Never knew I'd be trying to do makeup for hours, so yes, it is difficult. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Important to remember. Excuse me. I can't talk today. I can. I just momentarily couldn't. Eleanor Roosevelt. That baby report, your message only proved your point. Yeah, you know what? I feel like it's subversive because of the fact that, you know, like I said, I feel like we always have to be subversive so much. And it's like, you know, I basically, like, I made a woman trap and a man bit. I wasn't expecting it to happen that way or so fast, and I knew when I started saying it on Tumblr or Facebook or on YouTube that it was like, oh no, some dude's gonna, like, I'm probably gonna get threats or, like, whatever, because it's like, this always happens when a woman talks about the fact that we're not inferior, right? And I didn't really care about this. I just thought it was funny. And it's like, it's such a minor inconvenience, and it's so funny, and you're right, it's like, they just proved my point, and that's the whole thing. Kind of laughing about it, but at the same time, it's like the fact that society encourages this pisses me off. So anyway, tree shaming. Oh, pollen. Yeah. I'm sorry. I have to shame the trees for ejaculating all over the place. But anyway, I guess that's as good of a point to leave off as any. I feel like I've basically wrapped around most of my topics. I do it in sort of like a brick joke sort of way. Sometimes I try and make sure it always comes back around, even when things do branch, because of the fact that, like, you know, it does all wrap around. And I guess it just sort of does, because, you know, I guess I feel like if there's a reason for tangents to happen, it's pretty much natural that they close after a point, but it's easier for me to, like, rant at length sometimes about things to get it all out so that I can talk about one thing in, like, a short form video, which is what I like to do, as opposed to, like, feeling so bogged down in, like, the layered complexities of how it interacts with other things in my life and other people's lives and other things I've been thinking about and dealing with lately. Like, just the whole makeup being so complicated. I feel like I don't feel like those two link, but it's like two things I wanted to talk about today. They're both misogynist. That's how they link. So I feel like the biggest thing with that, though, is just that, like, as far as, like, the way that we talk about makeup amongst ourselves as transgender women, as opposed to focus on passing, like, if you want your life to be easier, then, you know, wearing like, your makeup a certain way, it's like, it makes me think of the whole, like, the way that people are like, oh no, like, you know, women's makeup is lying to men, and it's like, honey, if you believe that we came out of the womb looking like that, I got a bridge to sell you, like, in my living room. That's the level of ridiculousness. It's not even oceanfront property in Arizona ridiculousness, it's a bridge in my living room ridiculousness. But so, like, I feel like a lot of times what causes people to maybe, like, pay more undue awkward attention sometimes to transgender women, it actually can be makeup. Like, sometimes I found that life was a little bit easier to avoid being outed or clocked or misgendered when, I don't wear makeup. And what it is that I flaunt convention, and I do it intentionally. I don't believe in a system that sets a bunch of rigid rules for what makeup is okay when, because I believe makeup is supposed to be fun and, like, make you feel better about yourself, no matter what. You should put it on because you want to feel pretty and feel pretty. But, like, I guess, like, I feel like I know a little bit more about the rules than some transgender women do, but I feel like that's just me being silly. Because of, like, being a lesbian and spending so much time with, like, other friends who are female, but it's like, even if you're not, don't a lot of transgender women spend a lot of time with our female friends. And so I spent a lot of time learning those rules, getting acclimatized to those rules, and knowing what they are, even if I choose not to follow them. But, like, knowing them and how to apply them to your makeup, like, what is a daytime makeup situation? Because there are a lot of transgender women who, like, we don't get these opportunities to learn, we're afraid to ask, we're shamed away from it, we are afraid that people will find out that we're trans and their lives will turn to shit. And like, society needs to stop doing that thing when we come out, or when we're outed or whatever, but, like, and it needs to stop making makeup so gendered too, because, like, men who want to be pretty should be pretty. Non-binary people who want to be pretty should be pretty. Women who want to just say fuck makeup and everything it has to do in my life should be able to do so without feeling like they're stepping outside of the bounds of how a woman is and is not allowed to live her life. So fucked up. We have bounds for how a woman is and is not allowed to live her life without facing some kind of social consequences. whether it's like with makeup, like not getting that job, you know, being treated like really like inappropriately if you're a transgender woman and someone like sees your makeup doesn't match with what the social conventions call for at the time, and like decides to take a closer look at you because of it, and like decides that you're trans based on whatever other things they put together, which is ridiculous, and people do it to cis people too every now and then. But like, and start treating you differently than they would have otherwise. It's so ridiculous. It's like, and I always feel like there's this weird culture around makeup and clothing and gender that's like almost people like they want to get to a point where it's like it doesn't matter as much anymore. They don't want to offend anyone, but that's why you should ask people's pronouns. Like, okay, don't assume just because someone's got a dress and makeup what gender they are, but like ask if you're not sure what pronouns they want to use. Be like, what pronouns do you prefer? Every trans person will know what you're talking about in a heartbeat. And be like, oh, she, her, they, them, what are yours? You know? And I feel like most gender nonconforming, like, cis people, too, would be like, you know, oh, he, him, you know, I just like wearing dresses or makeup, you know, and I don't feel like that's a gendered thing. But, like, for me, for example, like, it'd be like she, her. It's that simple. But, like, so we can't go so far that, like, we start just, like, you know, it's like we should get to the point of not gendering things where we just don't gender people. We let them gender themselves. Because that's what you want, right? Like, you want to be able to gender yourself, right? Everyone does, right? Okay, so we should let everyone. And we should let everyone choose how they perform their gender, as opposed to, like, saying all these rules. Because it's fucked up, as, like, any tomboy will tell you. Just, I guess, why I'm telling you. Part of why I'm telling you. I mean, the rest is obvious. But not much about me is very subtle. So anyway, I want to thank you for watching and being here for the first episode of the Melodrama Menagerie. I want to apologize also for the fact that I didn't have any regular video releases this Wednesday. These podcast type things, I don't know if I'll be setting them up on, like, any other types of feeds. I guess, I don't know if I have to for it to be a podcast, or I have to set up an RSS feed. Or, like, if they'll be on SoundCloud or iTunes or anything, because I like video. And I like YouTube. Even though it's frustrating at times when they, like, demonetize LGBT and feminist content, which is bullshit. So, if you feel like that's bullshit, you can go to patreon.com/DeliaMelody and help me get a desk and nifty lighting and a fish tank behind me, because it'd make for a better quality podcast. Help me get a makeup artist. You know, help me be able to, like, hire a makeup artist so that I can not be so like caught up in my passion over what I talk about, what I want to talk about, that I don't end up having my makeup done if I want to have it done. Because I like having my makeup done in front of a camera. I feel like just any profession that involves being in front of a camera, you get makeup put on you regardless of gender anyway. Maybe that's not as true for YouTube. But I like makeup. It's fun. It should be fun. And, like, everything else you want to do with how you express your gender should be fun. If you want to, like, I don't know, do anything you want with your life. As long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. Be yourself. As always, thank you so very much for watching. And until next time, be your most beautiful you.